Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 451 The Saint's Plan. The sudden turn of events startled Chiola. He never expected there to be a third wizard hidden in the room. But he quickly realized his mistake, for the sound of a strange witch chanting a spell suddenly came from behind him. Not 3, but 4. Chiola abruptly raised his wand and turned around, but it was too late. His chest felt like it had been hit by a heavy hammer, and he was thrown backward. Bang! Chiola's body crashed through a wooden door, landing heavily on the ground, vomiting a mouthful of blood. Lissa suffered a similar fate. The violent movement caused her wounds to reopen and bleed, leaving her bandages covered in bright red spots. Lissa's face was contorted with pain. She looked up furiously, but when she saw who the attacker was, she froze. You, Lissa couldn't believe it. The attacker was the boy who had saved her earlier. She stammered in English, what are you doing here? How could I witness such a good show if I wasn't here? Ralph smiled, pointing his wand at Lissa. Lissa, enduring the pain, snapped, what are you trying to do? Attack the wizards of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic delegation? Oh dear, I'm always a law-abiding citizen. How could I possibly do something that could cause a diplomatic crisis? Ralph smiled, hooking his fingers together and clenching them tightly. The iron cage holding the cat shattered into pieces. Now it's none of my business. You can send a lawyer's letter to the French Ministry of Magic. The cat emerged from the cage, shook its fur, glanced coldly at the boy, and then roared as it pounced forward. Lissa frantically retreated, but the cat had already knocked her to the ground, its mouth opening and closing, biting her head, roaring and tearing at it violently. The woman screamed and howled in agony. Chiola swallowed hard. He grabbed the pocket watch, intending to use magic to unlock the door and escape. At the last second, the sharp iron spikes from the broken cage, under Ralph's control, shot towards him. Unable to dodge in time, Chiola raised his hand to block, tilting his head as the iron rod pierced through his palm, leaving a bloody gash on his face. Voldemort would self-destruct in front of me. Do you think you can escape? Ralph sneered, walking towards Chiola. With a flick of his wrist, the mechanical pocket watch flew into his hand. Karin lifted her invisibility cloak and shouted, who exactly are you people? Chiola's face was ashen, but he remained defiant. He spat blood onto the ground and said coldly, even if you kill me, you won't get any information out of me. I'll talk, tell it to stop biting me. Lissa screamed, pleading for help. Quick, tell it to shut up. Very good, I like obedient women the most. Ralph smiled slightly and said in French, Blackie, that's your name, right? Stop biting her, I need to interrogate her. The black cat understood Ralph's words, immediately releasing Lissa and retreating. Lissa lay on the ground, sobbing and clutching her injured arm. Her clothes were covered in blood. She looked up at the boy and let out a frightened whimper. No, don't hurt me, stop crying, Rove snapped impatiently. Even the charcoal didn't hurt you, too badly. The spirit cat raised its head and meowed in agreement. Rove couldn't resist reaching out to touch it, but it immediately pulled back, baring its sharp teeth and letting out a silent growl at the boy. Little thing, quite shy, Rove chuckled. Or are you holding a grudge because I helped you this morning? The spirit cat meowed softly again, turned, and pounced on Chiola, pulling and tugging at his injured leg. The man screamed in agony as he was bullied. Seeing Lissa still crying, Ralph sneered, trying to stall for time. No, wah, it's alright, I have a truth serum here. Ralph pulled a small bottle filled with a clear liquid from his pocket, shook it, and chuckled, just 3 or 4 drops, and you'll reveal your deepest secrets to me. Karin stared at Ralph strangely. Would a decent person carry a potion like a truth serum? He really wasn't as innocent as he seemed. Just as Ralph was about to give Lissa the truth serum, her appearance suddenly changed. The wrinkles on her face disappeared, her skin became smooth, and her long black hair turned pale yellow. Apologos potion, Ralph narrowed his eyes. No wonder the charcoal-faced girl chose to bite her. The boy stepped forward, grabbed Lissa's chin, and forced her mouth open wide before dripping the liquid into her mouth. After taking the truth serum, Lyssa's eyes glazed over, and her cheeks relaxed. The boy squatted down in front of her, meeting her gaze. "Can you hear me?" Lyssa nodded, blankly replying, "I can hear you. Aren't you Lady Eleanor?" Ralph asked again. "No, Eleanor is an official of the Norwegian Ministry of Magic. I attacked her. I impersonated her with Polyjuice Potion. Introduce yourself." "My name is Lyssa Michelle. I'm 30 years old. From Germany. I am a saint." Karin's face changed drastically upon hearing the word saint. Ralph glanced at the girl and continued, "What is a saint?" "A believer in death, who pursues the deathly hallows." Lyssa lifted her robe, revealing no underwear underneath. As she pulled it up, two large, pale but full, pinkish, breasts were exposed. What Lyssa wanted to show was the tattoo on her chest, a triangle with a vertical line and a circle inside. Ralph leaned closer, squinting as he examined it closely. It seemed to be a symbol Lyssa had had when she was very young. Over the years, due to excessive development, the triangle was somewhat distorted. Rove had seen this before in his life. His roommate had a tattoo on his arm that looked like a lobster, but after some inquiry, he learned that before the man grew fat, it was actually a scorpion. "What is your purpose, you saints?" "To disrupt the convening of this International Wizarding Federation meeting," Lyssa whispered. Rove frowned. "How do you plan to disrupt it?" "To inject poison into the floating dragon's body, causing its death, making the entire ship crash, resulting in a plane crash for the representatives of various countries." "When will the plan be implemented?" Karin asked hurriedly. "Originally, it was to be executed when we reached Berlin, making the entire ship crash into the Reichstag building," Lyssa said dryly. "But that spirit cat noticed my abnormality, so the boss decided to execute the plan ahead of schedule." "Ahead of schedule?" Rove inquired. "Before how far?" "Now," Lyssa replied. "A saint has already gone to kill the floating dragon. The ship is about to crash, and we need to use the portkey to leave." Rove and Karin exchanged a glance, both seeing terror in each other's eyes. "This is from 10,000 meters in the air, plummeting straight down. The outcome is self-evident." Chapter 452 The Crash of the Floating Dragon Ship. Throughout history, countless wizards have followed the legend of the three brothers, pursuing the Deathly Hallows. These wizards are also known as saints. Rove had long known this title, but this was the first time he had encountered real saints in reality, and he certainly hadn't expected them to expand their operations to the great cause of terrorist attacks. Were they saints, Death Eaters, or a sorcerer's party? In any case, regardless of their organization, such acts of terrorism could not be ignored. Rove woke the unconscious Carmel and had Lyssa recount the events. After hearing it, he was also greatly alarmed and hurriedly took the boy to find his superior. The two walked through corridors and past pillars, with Karin, cloaked in invisibility, following closely behind. They soon arrived at a luxurious room. This was a bar on the ship, where many wizards were leisurely sipping wine and chatting to pass the time. Carmel led Rove to a wizard, who introduced him anxiously. "This is Mr. Mitt, the manager of this floating dragon ship, Mr. Scamander. You can talk to him." Mitt was sitting on the sofa, drinking a bottle of ale. He was somewhat overweight, almost bald, with a fleshy chin and a short, trimmed yellow beard. Upon seeing Ralph, Mitt stood up, looking the boy over with interest, and warmly extended his hand, saying, "Hello, Mr. Scamander. I heard you rescued Lady Eleanor this morning. Thank you very much for your help. Is there something you need?" After shaking his hand, Ralph succinctly explained, "The witch I rescued is actually named Lyssa Michelle. She attacked Eleanor and used Polyjuice Potion to impersonate her and infiltrate this floating dragon ship. That's why the spirit cat attacked her. This is a very unusual accusation." Mitt's expression turned serious, and he frowned. "Mr. Scamander, do you have any evidence?" "I have evidence, Mr. Mitt," Carmel said urgently. "The witch has been apprehended, and you can interrogate her at any time, but before the interrogation, the most urgent task is to send wizards to protect the floating dragon. Her companions have already gone to the bottom of the ship to kill it," Ralph said. Mitt was completely stunned. He hadn't expected to hear such shocking news on such an ordinary morning. He looked at Ralph in disbelief and said, "Are you sure you're not joking?" "Would I joke with you like that?" Ralph said seriously. "You'd better contact the ground immediately, set up a temporary flu network, and move the wizards on the ship away. Don't hesitate any longer. Time waits for no one." "Yes," Carmel chimed in, "I can testify. Mr. Mitt, please hurry. Milton fell silent. He had heard of Ralph's reputation, especially in England, where the boy was quite famous. Although Scamander was just a child, his words couldn't be taken lightly. Of course, there was a possibility of a prank, but the worst outcome would be being fooled and losing face. But if the boy was telling the truth and he didn't believe him, all the wizards on the ship would die. Milton wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to calm himself down, but his blue knuckles betrayed his inner panic. Okay, I'll send someone to check the floating dragon at the bottom of the ship right away, but Mitt had only run a few steps when the entire private room suddenly began to shake violently, as if a giant hammer had suddenly slammed onto the floor from below, causing everything in the room to jump up. Everything was moving rapidly, bottles of wine fell to the floor, the chandelier above shook violently, making a terrifying cracking sound, and the heavy oak wine rack slid rapidly towards the French windows, shattering the glass with a crash. Mitt staggered, his whole body involuntarily leaning forward, almost hitting a pillar. The other wizards were also thrown into the air, falling to the ground, looking up in confusion, whispering among themselves. What happened? What happened? Rove steadied himself on the sofa, looking at the shaking room, and sighed. It seems it's too late. What awaited them was a plane crash from 10,000 meters in the sky. At the bottom of the ship's hold, all the wizards guarding the floating dragon had been killed. Several saints descended the stairs and saw a broad, flat back covered in scales. That was the floating dragon's spine, upon which the entire ship was built. A wizard stood on the dragon's back, wielding a goblin-made longsword, and plunged it downwards. The floating dragon's thick scales were finally breached, and another wizard poured a potion into the wound. The floating dragon immediately let out a painful howl that echoed throughout the ship, its body twisting and tumbling wildly, along with the hole on its back. Hurry up and get out of here, another wizard produced a key, and after the others pressed it down, they vanished from the spot. After a violent tremor, the entire ship came to a stop in midair, then slowly began to fall. The many wizards inside the room scattered and trampled each other, desperately trying to escape. Some cried, some staggered, some vomited, their pale faces filled with fear. In the chaos, Karen lifted her invisibility cloak, clutching the pocket watch from Chira, and grabbed Rove's arm, saying, "Let's go quickly, we can still escape with this key." "No, Karen, you go first." Rove shook his head, refusing. "I have things to do." "What are you going to do if you stay?" Karen's face paled, and she cried out, "This ship will soon crash, plummeting from 10,000 meters in the air. If you stay, you'll surely die." "I know, that's why I can't leave yet," Rove said earnestly. "If I leave, all the wizards on this ship will die." "But you can't save them." Karen desperately clung to Rove, trying to pull him away, her voice urgent. "Are you going to save that floating dragon? By the time you find it, the ship will have already crashed." "No, I can have other magical creatures tow this ship, then you'll at least have to find a magical creature about the same size as the floating dragon." "Right," Karen said in astonishment, "there aren't any other fire dragons here to replace it." Rove had already opened his black leather suitcase. He calmly said, "Didn't I tell you? I'm a magizoologist." "So what?" Karen retorted angrily. "I'm a wand maker too, but I can't just conjure a wand out of thin air." "Just because you're a magizoologist doesn't mean you can conjure a dragon." "You guess it." Rove snapped his fingers and laughed. "But there's no reward." The boy whistled loudly at his suitcase. "Come out, Norbert." Karen looked down and saw that through the opening of the suitcase, she could see a large room. She quickly heard a dragon's roar. A moment later, a colossal creature flew out of the suitcase, folding its enormous, knight-like wings and landing in the spacious hall. At that moment, everyone who had been like ants on a hot plate stared in disbelief at the suddenly appearing Norwegian Spinosaurus. Rolf picked up the box, turned, and leaped onto the dragon's back. He held out his hand to Karen and said, "Hurry up." Karen opened her mouth wide, hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the boy and climbed onto the dragon's back as well, clinging tightly to the scales. Rolf commanded, "Up." Norbert roared, its belly flattened on the ground, its wings unfurled with a thunderous roar, and it suddenly soared upwards. Chapter 453 The Destroyed Boxplatons? Paris. 6th Arrondissement, Place Furstenberg. As the entrance to the French Ministry of Magic headquarters, this place is bustling with people. Minister of Magic Henri Abel, surrounded by a group of wizards, stands before a tree in the center of the square, waiting for the elevator to enter the hall. Abel holds a copy of the Grand Paris Daily, the headline of which is about his congratulations to the national team players who are about to depart for the Quidditch World Cup. The newspaper also carries a photograph of Abel with the players. He is small, standing in the center, surrounded by 7 large men. Apart from the minister, who is white, everyone else is black. 1 white and 7 black, quite striking. A red-haired wizard approached from afar. Seeing the minister, he greeted him warmly. "Hey, Henry, you're back from your visit?" "Yeah, Bird, how was it?" Bird chuckled. "I read in the newspaper you played a friendly match against them." "Don't even mention it," Abel sighed. "They thrashed me 58 times. Those big black guys really wore me out." Bird's lips twitched. He thought to himself that these national team players had no sense of propriety. In the Ministry of Magic's internal tournaments, the minister, as the chaser, always managed to thrash the opponent by a dozen or more goals, easily winning the championship. "Can the French Quidditch team win this year?" Bird asked again. "It's going to be tough," Abel shook his head. "These black guys are okay at playing Muggle soccer, but Quidditch isn't about physicality, it's more about technique and brains, and they're definitely lacking." Last World Cup, France made it to the round of 16, only to be eliminated by Vietnam. The British newspapers even gave the French team a nickname. Vietnamese prisoners. Reaching the semi-finals this year would be a success. The two chatted about the Quidditch World Cup for a while, then discussed the upcoming International Wizarding Federation Congress. "I wonder which wizard will be elected president this time," Albert said. "I just saw the delegation off on that floating dragon ship yesterday." "Most likely Dumbledore," Bird guessed. "He's the wizard I admire most. Of those wretched Englishmen, I like Newt Scamander the most. He saved Paris from Grindelwald back then." Albert laughed. "I was only 7 years old then, and all the newspapers were full of reports about it. It left a deep impression on me." "But Newt Scamander didn't run, did he?" Bird asked doubtfully. "No, so I had Stambo vote for Babajide Akimbid," Albert said in a low voice. "Isn't Akimbid an African wizard?" "Precisely because he's African, he's one of us," Abel chuckled smugly. "Most African wizards have immigrated to France." "That's what I was just thinking," Bird said with a worried expression. "I saw the statistics. This year, less than 40% of newborn wizards in France are white babies, the rest are mostly black. I'm really afraid that one day a bunch of black wizards will tell our children, 'Get out of France. This is the land our ancestors protected.'" Bird was very worried that the French rooster would turn into a French black rooster. Abel patted Bird on the shoulder, reassuring him, "It's all right, trust in the wisdom of future generations, they will manage this balance." The elevator arrived, and the group went inside, entering a rather artistic hall. The arched ceiling was painted with numerous constellation patterns, all in the shape of magical creatures. Passing through the foyer, they arrived at the central hall, where a huge statue stood prominently. The statue featured the iconic elements of the French tricolor, the hat emblem, and the Phrygian hat. Below the statue is a row of French proverbs: incante, envoûter, conjure, meaning, to cast a spell, to incante, to summon. "Minister, you've finally arrived," a witch rushed over, her voice filled with anxiety. "Something terrible has happened, Taro. How many times have I told you, stay calm in times of crisis?" Abel glared at his secretary, his face stern as he reprimanded her. "What kind of behavior is this, making such a fuss?" "But, no buts. I don't want to see you so flustered anymore. Calm your breathing first." Taro was silent for 10 seconds before Abel, maintaining his composure, asked, "All right, what happened?" "The Ministry of Magic just detected that the floating dragon ship escorting representatives from various countries to Berlin," Taro paused, then continued, "fell from the sky." Abel's face turned deathly pale. His chest heaved, and he gasped, "Why didn't you say so sooner?" Taro felt wronged and was about to retort when Abel asked again, "What's the situation now?" "I had the Flu Network Management Bureau contact the wizards on that ship to try and set up a temporary flu network, but we couldn't get through." "Send a rescue immediately," Abel said. "But how?" Taro asked doubtfully. "That's a floating dragon ship. We can't expect Aurors to use a levitation charm on flying broomsticks to stop it from falling." Abel was speechless. He paced slowly and asked again, "Where's the ship now?" "Over the Pyrenees," Taro said. Abel breathed a sigh of relief. The Pyrenees weren't densely populated areas. Even if it fell from 10,000 meters, it most likely wouldn't affect Muggle cities. It might even cross the border and crash in Spain, then it would truly have nothing to do with the French Ministry of Magic. Taro seemed to know what Abel was thinking. She reminded him, "Minister, judging from its current location, the ship is very likely to crash at Boxburton School of Magic." At Boxburton School of Magic, Madame Maxime was organizing a meeting with the teachers to discuss participating in the Triwizard Tournament when she received news of an evacuation from the Ministry of Magic. She stepped out of her office and looked up at the sky, searching for the floating dragon ship. Someone suddenly gaped, pointing towards the far west, and then, regaining their senses, shouted, "Look! Look! There it is!" Sure enough, something was piercing through the clouds and plummeting downwards. Although its speed was extremely fast, because of its immense height, anyone glancing in that direction could easily spot this astonishing spectacle. It was like a comet, hurtling towards the earth, clearly visible through the rapidly flowing clouds, like a long, drawn-out claw mark across the azure sky. Maxim stood there dumbfounded, staring at the sky. Next school year, she was planning to take her students to Hogwarts for the Triwizard Tournament. Participate? Forget it, the school's about to be gone. Chapter 454 Mrs. Maxim. Amidst the clouds, a strong wind whipped at Rolf's robes, making them crackle. He circled the ship on his fire dragon, discovering that the floating dragon was still alive, struggling to spread its wings and slow the ship's descent. Rolf had Norbert fly beneath the dragon, attempting to lift its massive body and propel it upwards. However, the weight of the dragon and the ship was too great. Norbert, barely an adult, simply couldn't support such a colossal creature. The ship continued its descent, accelerating ever faster. The wind howled fiercely, whipping Karin's braids wildly. Perched on the dragon's neck, she cried out, "Rolf, no. That floating dragon is too heavy, unless another fire dragon arrives." Rolf interrupted the girl. "Don't tell me." Karin stared at the boy in front of her. "You still have a Norwegian Spinosaurus in your trunk." "Although I was planning to get a breeding dragon for Norbert," Rolf chuckled, "I don't really have a second fire dragon right now." Karin had just breathed a sigh of relief when she heard the boy continue, "But thunderbirds, bird snakes, winged birds, there are still plenty of these large bird-like magical creatures." Karin was completely dumbfounded when she saw Ralph open the trunk again and start whistling. She was only smuggling some magical creature fur, while Ralph was directly leading a whole group of magical creatures around the world. Karin was experiencing the disparity of the world for the first time. Ralph noticed that the girl sitting behind him was tightening her grip on his waist. He winced in pain and couldn't help but turn around, only to find Karin staring at him with a strange look, as if she was seeing him for the first time in her life. "What are you looking at?" Ralph asked loudly. "I was thinking," Karin murmured, "if you were caught by the International Wizarding Confederation, would you be imprisoned in Nurmengard, spending the rest of your life with Grindelwald?" "No," Ralph said confidently. "Why? The president of the International Confederation is Dumbledore, a good friend of my grandfather, my headmaster, and I have a good relationship with him. In short, I have connections." "Then if I go to Hogwarts now, can I be as arrogant as you?" Karin suddenly asked with a smile. "Yes," Ralph nodded, "but students like you who are expelled from other schools are usually sent to the advanced classes in Azkaban for a period of training." During their banter, Thunderbird, Airwingbird, and Birdsnake flew out of the box one after another. Under Ralph's command, they, along with Norbert, lifted the four corners of the floating dragon ship, flapping their wings frantically. The entire ship finally stopped falling and remained suspended high in the air. "The ship has stopped falling," Karin laughed joyfully, shaking the boy's shoulders. "Rover, you did it. You saved all the wizards on this ship. Your name will be known throughout the entire magical world. Everyone will be grateful to you." Rover struggled to speak. "We saved it together," he gasped, "and you need to go back to the floating dragon ship immediately and tell Carmel and Mitt the news, so everyone can calm down." "Where are you going?" Karin asked curiously. "I'm going to check on that floating dragon," Rover said seriously, "to see if we can revive the poor fellow." Rover patted Norbert and ordered, "Descend, let the ship land slowly." At Boxburton School of Magic, a group of teachers stood in the center of the square, looking up at the increasingly clear floating dragon ship in the sky, all filled with fear. How big a crater would it create if such a huge thing fell? "Headmaster, hurry up, it'll be too late if we don't leave now," a witch urged. Maxim nodded blankly. The good news was that it was summer vacation and the students had all gone home. The bad news was that it seemed the school was truly doomed. She stared dejectedly at Boxburton's castle. While not as ancient as Hogwarts Castle, it had stood for 700 years, and its destruction was unbearable for her, the headmistress. Maxim couldn't help but pray that if any wizard could step forward to stop this terrible disaster and save Buttons, she would offer herself, cough, introduce her most beautiful female student to him. Hurry and get them out of here, Maxim sighed, looking as if she had aged 10 years in an instant. Wait! Headmistress, the ship seems to be slowing down, someone suddenly shouted. Mrs. Maxim looked up sharply, her eyes wide with disbelief. A wizard immediately handed her a telescope. Maxim's hope returned, and she looked up through the telescope. In her vision, she saw 4 magical creatures carrying the ship, slowly descending. It seemed the descent speed had been controlled. A young boy was flying in midair, carrying a black box and examining the floating dragon. She recognized the boy's face instantly. Ralph Scamander. Maxim, filled with anxiety yet barely contained excitement, exclaimed, "Immediately send all the rune horses into the sky to help Ralph pull the ship down, making it descend at the slowest possible speed." "Yes, sir." Ralph was examining the floating dragon when he suddenly noticed dozens of rune horses flying up, and a wizard explaining. He then realized that below them was Buttons. The boy was also fatally afraid, if it had truly crashed, this school, on par with Hogwarts, would likely have been physically destroyed. Then, Hogwarts, already lacking in educational rankings among magic schools, would have lost another one. With a divine rune horse helping him hold the floating dragon ship, Ralph had nothing to say and simply recalled his fire dragon, winged bird, and other magical creatures back into the box. He and Karen had spoken arrogantly, but it was illegal after all, so some concealment was necessary. The divine rune horse, a special breed of Pegasus, was enormous and incredibly strong, more than capable of handling the subsequent tasks. Inside the cabin, the violent shaking that had lasted for over 30 seconds finally stopped, and the wizards found the entire ship quiet again. This time it was complete silence, even the sensation of falling had disappeared, but no wizard dared to go out. A moment later, the boy who had flown out on the fire dragon returned, saying softly, "We've landed. You can get off." Some people stuck their heads out of the window, gazing at Buttons' castle as if in a dream. Soon, the wizards who had survived the ordeal were first stunned, then overjoyed, weeping uncontrollably, and embracing each other. Ralph, carrying the black leather suitcase, jumped off the ship and was immediately enveloped by a gigantic figure. Mrs. Maxim. Ralph looked up at the beautiful witch before him and smiled. "Hello, it's been a long time, Ralph." Mrs. Maxim suddenly bent down and picked Ralph up. The difference in their sizes was so great. She seemed to be holding an infant in her arms. Ralph immediately felt a soft mass, a chest larger than a basketball, pressing against his face. "Ralph, thank you for saving Buttons." Ralph had only one thought: Mrs. Maxim was going to stage a breast-killing incident to suffocate him. Chapter 455 The Scamander Family's Talent. As a half-giant, Madame Maxim was indeed exceptionally gifted, truly astonishing. Especially after Ralph was suffocated for several minutes without any blind spots, and then his head was yanked out with a snap, her understanding of this point became even deeper. Madame Maxim looked at the dizzy boy and asked in a teasing tone, "Ralph, are you alright?" Ralph gasped for fresh air to prevent himself from fainting from lack of oxygen, and said in a relieved tone, I'm fine, that's good. By the way," Madame Maxim's gaze flickered almost imperceptibly at the black leather suitcase in the boy's hands, and she smiled, saying, "What about those 4 magical creatures that were helping you carry the floating dragon ship?" "What magical creatures?" Ralph blinked, his blue eyes filled with confusion. "What are you talking about, Madame Maxim? I don't understand, playing dumb with me, huh?" Madame Maxim couldn't help but laugh. "Fire dragons, thunderbirds, winged birds, and bird serpents. Don't deny it, I saw them clearly through binoculars, and even had someone take pictures. Hey, look at my memory." Ralph pretended to scratch the back of his head, saying, "I was short of oxygen just now, and my mind is all muddled. There were indeed those magical creatures you mentioned, but they all flew away." Maxim chuckled at this statement. "Aren't they your magical creatures? Where could they have flown to? Did they fly into your box?" "Madame Maxim, you can drink potions however you want, but you can't say whatever you want," Ralph said seriously and righteously. "Those are all magical creatures that are explicitly prohibited from being kept. How could I possibly violate the law and keep them privately?" Maxim had a mischievous smile on her face and said, Then can you explain to me why they appeared here and even helped you lift the floating dragon ship? Haven't you heard the saying? Ralph lowered his voice. Whenever any Scamander is in dire need, magical creatures will come flying. I have a special connection with those powerful birds. Maxim chuckled, shaking her head. If I remember correctly, that's a phrase used to describe the Dumbledore family, isn't it? Really? Ralph grinned sheepishly. Ancient surnames are often related. I've checked the family tree. My great-great-great-grandfather married a witch from the Dumbledore family. I probably also have a similar magical talent, able to summon magical creatures when in danger. This kind of thing often skips generations. Well, 4 generations. Ralph used Professor Trelawney's line, concluding seriously, in short, I absolutely do not keep dragons as magical creatures. Maxim listened to Ralph's ramblings, gave him a deep look, and grinned. Very good. Remember, always stick to this in front of everyone, understand? When the French Minister of Magic comes to see you later, if he asks, you should say the same thing. And if reporters interview you, you should answer the same way. Ralph paused, then nodded slightly. He understood what Madame Maxim meant. The terrorist attack on representatives of the International Wizarding Federation was a major incident unseen in many years, extremely heinous in nature. As the savior, Ralph would undoubtedly be in the global spotlight, his deeds reported in every newspaper. But as a hero, if you were discovered to be privately raising a group of magical creatures, including dragons, that would be no small matter. It would be like in a country with strict gun control, where he used a gun to save innocent people. As an illegal gun owner, if the public found out, it wouldn't be a minor issue. Some things are like that. They weigh less than 4 ounces on the scale, but once weighed, they become a ton. After finishing his conversation with Maxim, Ralph prepared to go find Karin, but people kept coming up to him, hugging him, expressing their gratitude, and calling him their savior. These were all representatives from various countries on the floating dragon ship, and Ralph took the opportunity to expand his network of connections. After he graduates, he'll definitely be carrying a black suitcase and visiting them one by one in their countries. Soon, a group of French wizards arrived, led by a middle-aged man of medium height, plain appearance, short beard, flat and pale cheeks, and narrow eyes. Hello, Mr. Scamander, I am Henry Abel, Minister of Magic. The man extended his hand. Ralph and Abel shook hands. The minister looked extremely excited, his cheeks flushed with emotion. He gripped Rove's hand tightly, his voice trembling with emotion. I was terrified when I heard the news, thinking there was definitely a plane crash, but you saved me. Mr. Scamander, thank you so much, it's nothing short of a miracle. Rove, somewhat embarrassed by the praise, pulled his hand away from Abel's and said modestly, I only did a small thing. No, you are great, Abel inquired, your name will surely spread throughout the entire magical world, and poets will sing of your heroic deeds. Abel praised him for over 10 minutes before finally getting to the point, asking how he had saved the floating dragon ship. Rove repeated what he had just told Maxim to Abel. Whether Abel believed him or not, the boy certainly did. There's one more thing, Abel said gravely. I heard from Milton and Carmel that you've captured 2 murderers. Where are they now? I hope you can hand them over to the French Ministry of Magic. I'm sorry, but that's a request I can't grant. Ralph refused. I will hand them over to the International Confederation of Wizards, which is Dumbledore's domain, but this happened in France, Abel said hesitantly. We have the right to investigate, and we must investigate, and you should understand, Mr. Scamander, these things don't wait any later, and their accomplices might escape. Those people are German wizards who boarded the ship in Norway, Ralph said. Although the plan was carried out in France, it was just a coincidence. Even if I handed them over to you, you would still have to cooperate with the German and Norwegian ministries of magic, and it's impossible to take action in a short time. Rather than wasting time like that, it would be simpler to send me to Berlin immediately. Of course, there was a deeper reason, which Ralph didn't reveal. This matter involved saints and the Deathly Hallows, and it wasn't appropriate for too many people to know. Ralph didn't want the 2 prisoners he'd finally captured to die needlessly in a French prison. They were his only lead, and it was safer to keep them in his own hands. Chapter 456 The Corpses of Azkaban. Ralph refused Minister Abel's request firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. Abel, unable to forcibly abduct them, had no choice but to leave dejectedly. Before departing, he left behind a large group of aurors to guard the school and protect the representatives from various countries. Having survived the plane crash, their safety now rested entirely on the shoulders of the French Ministry of Magic. Fortunately, it was summer vacation, and with no students at the school, they were temporarily staying in Boxbuttons, safe from disturbance and loss of contact. After Abel left, Ralph, following the scent lingering on his invisibility cloak, quickly found the missing Karin. The girl was huddled in a stable, holding a water basin placed before a group of runahowards. Ralph leaned against a wooden post, asking with interest, "What are you doing?" "I'm feeding them water," Karin said, looking up and wiping the sweat from her brow. "Once they're familiar with each other, I'll take some of the runahowards' manes and tails. You'll definitely get kicked," Ralph chuckled. "They'll kick you away. Why, these horses only drink single malt whiskey," Ralph explained, arms crossed. "They won't drink your water. Single malt whiskey? That's so luxurious." Karin clicked her tongue in amazement, then asked suspiciously, "How did you know?" "I have a friend named Fleur Delacour," Ralph said slowly as he walked into the stable. "She's a student at Boxbuttons, and she told me it was a pity it was summer vacation, and Fleur wasn't at school. Otherwise, she could have taken her on a tour of Boxbuttons School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. But it didn't matter, she'd definitely be going to England for the Quidditch World Cup in the summer, and they could see each other then." Seeing that the magical horses weren't drinking water, Karin stood up angrily and asked curiously, "I just saw you chatting with the French Minister of Magic. Did you say when we could leave?" "Those representatives might stay here for a few more days," Ralph said softly, "but we'll definitely leave first." "Why?" Karin raised her chin and shook her black braid tied with a red and gold ribbon. "Such a serious terrorist attack. The International Wizarding Federation will definitely want to interrogate the perpetrators immediately, and they're all in my hands, so of course they'll take me away immediately," Rove explained. "If nothing unexpected happens, we should be able to leave here by tomorrow morning, then you can hide in my suitcase, and I'll take you to Berlin." "Your suitcase?" Karin looked down curiously at the black leather suitcase in the boy's hand, a braid fluttering in front of her eyes. She blinked and said, "Rove, can I go in and take a look now?" "Of course." Rove opened the suitcase, made an inviting gesture, and smiled. "Miss Gregovich, please." Karin walked to the opening of the suitcase with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, and jumped down without hesitation. Soon, Rove followed her into a wooden hut. One wall was lined with bookshelves and boxes filled with many magic books. The shelves on the other wall were filled with various ointments, herbs, and potions. There were also 4 wooden doors in the wall, each leading to a different room. Karin looked around the hut curiously, but soon her face showed disappointment. Ralph looked at the girl in surprise and said, "You're the first guest to enter my box and look so disappointed. I thought this place would house magical creatures like dragons and thunderbirds, and be at least the size of a Quidditch pitch." Karin sighed. "But it looks so small now. Dragons can't be kept here," Ralph chuckled. "You should go outside and take a look." "Don't be scared." The boy strode towards a wooden door, pulled the brass door knocker shaped like a griffin, and tilted his head, saying, "Come on, miss." Karin frowned, slowly stepped out of the door, and froze instantly when she saw the scenery outside. Directly in front of her was an incredibly vast, intertwined forest. A gentle breeze blew, and millions of leaves danced in unison, making the forest seem like a deep green ocean. Looking to the left, on the distant horizon, the mountains resembled majestic shadows, one after another, until they became grayish-white and blurred, with dark clouds flashing with lightning gathering on the jagged peaks. To the right, the terrain sloped gently, and a flat, open field stretched endlessly to the horizon, where a large, shimmering lake lay. Karin stared wide-eyed at the scene before her, her throat dry as sand, as if she had lost the ability to speak. After a long silence, the girl finally cried out, "Love, this place is so much bigger than outside. It's amazing." Karin's face lit up with excitement, and she ran off into the distance. Love couldn't help but smile. The girl had only run a few hundred meters when, passing a wooden hut, she suddenly screamed in terror. She stopped at the doorway, pointed at the hut, and stammered, "Dead man." "Yes." Ralph walked over, his smile suddenly vanishing, and he threatened, "Aren't you scared? He's the wizard I tricked into the box last time and then killed. I removed both his kidneys, and now it's your turn. I'm going to cut off your pretty face and sell it to someone else for a high price." Karin rolled her eyes. "You're not that kind of person." "How do you know? If you were, you could have done it last night when you tied me to the bed." "Why wait until today?" Karin pouted. Ralph laughed. "Come on, let's go inside and see." The boy went into the room, put on a mask for himself, and tossed a mask to Karin as well. Karin frowned, staring at the wizard lying on the table. He was young, probably in his 30s, with a deathly pale face and wide open, bright blue eyes staring at the ceiling. "How did this wizard die?" the girl asked softly. "Based on my initial assessment, he was killed by a Dementor," Ralph said slowly. "The Dementor sucked his soul out." "A Dementor?" Karin frowned. Was he a prisoner in Azkaban? Even she had heard of the infamous Azkaban and the Dementors. It was a wizarding prison on par with Ermengarde. "I did indeed find him in Azkaban," Ralph nodded. "Yesterday, I went to Azkaban with a British Minister of Magic to investigate. We accidentally found this body in a lake at the bottom of the island." "Do you know him?" Karin asked, then quickly added, "Since it was a chance discovery, you probably don't know him." Ralph was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Quite the opposite. I know him." Chapter 457 The Founders of the Saints. Rove gazed silently at the corpse, scrutinizing it for a long time before slowly saying, "Last summer, I traveled to America on the Mayflower. On the way, I met Captain Carlos. He told me about a friend named Kurga. He said Kurga bought a ship, became the captain, and went on an expedition, never to return." "This man is Kurga?" Karin asked. "Yes." Rove met the girl's gaze and nodded slightly. "Captain Carlos showed me a photo of himself and Kurga. The man looked exactly like this one. It's not uncommon for people to look alike." Rove had seen such people in his past life, strangers with no blood relation but strikingly similar appearances. But Kurga had a very noticeable mole with long black hair on his neck, and this corpse also had it. That single feature was enough to prove he was Kurga. But a problem arose. Kurga's sea adventure was 50 years ago. Captain Carlos, his contemporary, was already quite old, and even his granddaughter was 16 or 17. Yet Kurga, missing for over half a century, still looked as young as ever, appearing to be in his early 30s. Time seemed to have left no trace on him. Even more bizarrely, Carlos said Kurga went to find the Fountain of Good Fortune, but his ship had become a ghost ship, pulling a coffin. His own corpse, however, appeared in the lake where Dementors were born. Love was filled with questions, but unfortunately, Kurga was dead and could no longer answer his questions. Love didn't tell Karin many details before leading her away from the room. The two followed a stone path, through an oak forest, and arrived at a house. Lissa and Chira were in prison here, guarded by a spirit cat named Black Charcoal. Hearing footsteps, the spirit cat turned its head, staring intently at the boy and girl. Rove approached it, greeting it with a smile, and then asked, "Blackie, I might be going to Berlin tomorrow. Are you coming with me, or going back to your original owner?" Blackie silently looked up, its black eyes coldly staring at the boy. Rove smiled warmly and reached out to stroke its fluffy fur. Blackie opened its mouth, revealing sharp teeth. Rove ignored its intimidation and kept his hand on its head, speaking softly, "Stay. I'll take good care of you, and you'll like it here." The cat stared intently at Rove, its black eyes gleaming with a cold, alluring light. Suddenly, it raised its head, sniffed the boy's hand, and then licked his fingers with its rough but warm tongue. "Thank you." The boy scratched the cat's coal-black fur between its ears, and it purred contentedly. Seeing Ralph laugh, the charcoal-haired girl gently bit his hand again, then let out a haughty meow to maintain her dignity. Ralph's smile faded, but a slight smile still lingered at the corners of his mouth. It seemed his harem had gained another powerful member. The boy changed positions, petting the charcoal-haired girl for a while before standing up and looking at Lissa and Chira in the cage. He said calmly, "As for you two, you'll soon be sent to the International Wizarding Federation, where you'll spend the rest of your lives." Of course, before leaving, Ralph would erase their memories, making them forget this place. Hearing the boy's words, Lissa trembled all over. She screamed hoarsely, "Please, let me go. You can do whatever you want to me. I'm willing to sacrifice myself for you." Karin, who was petting the charcoal-haired girl, looked up and glared at Lissa with disgust. "Shut up, you spineless slut." Chira also growled at Lissa in a low voice, then stared intently at Ralph, his long face contorted with agitation. "The Saints won't let you get away with this." Voldemort said something similar. Ralph couldn't help but laugh. "You Saints, if you've got the guts, come find me at Hogwarts." And when Dumbledore isn't around, hearing the name Dumbledore, Chira shrank back in fear. At Voldemort's peak, the Death Eater's activities were confined to the British Isles. Even neighboring France wasn't significantly affected. Grindelwald, however, was different. He had wreaked havoc across the European continent for many years. Dumbledore, who defeated Grindelwald, was internationally renowned. Shirley might not care much for Voldemort, the so-called Dark Lord, but she was absolutely terrified of Dumbledore. This was also why Ralph wasn't afraid of the Saints. After all, he was at Hogwarts. Come at him if you dare. Although he wasn't afraid of the Saints, Ralph wanted to know more about this terrifying organization. He continued, "After listening to you talk about the Saints for so long, and even planning such a shocking case, who exactly is your leader?" Ralph was very curious about the wizard's identity. Lissa and Chiola exchanged a glance, remaining silent. Karin, however, suddenly whispered, "They probably don't know." Ralph glanced at Karin in surprise. The girl quickly explained, "I heard, the Saints are a secret organization divided into 33 levels. Members can advance their level by completing tasks. Each level grants them a secret about the Deathly Hallows. Lower-level Saints know nothing about higher-level Saints." "How do you know that?" Ralph asked curiously. "I heard it from my grandfather," Karin said, sticking out her tongue. "On a wall in Durmstrang, there's a symbol that looks like the witch's chest tattoo. Rumor has it that Grindelwald carved it with magic when he was still studying at Durmstrang. Many students took it as a symbol of Grindelwald and the sorcerers," Karin explained softly. "Later, I asked my grandfather, and he said it was the symbol of the Deathly Hallows, and he also told me what the Saints were." Ralph narrowed his eyes. Grigorovich might indeed know a lot about these things. After all, he had once possessed the Elder Wand, though it was later stolen by Grindelwald. The boy pondered for a moment, then suddenly remembered that the Earth Demon had killed Grigorovich for the Elder Wand. It seemed he would need to remind Karin one day to take her grandfather away from Germany. Just as the boy was lost in thought, Karin spoke again. "Ralph, although I don't know who the current leader of the Saints is, I heard my grandfather mention who its founder was." "Who?" Ralph asked. Karin, her expression slightly serious, said, "Poet Biddau." Chapter 458 Shocking. A mysterious wizard arrives at the German Ministry of Magic. Peter the Bard, born in Yorkshire, England, is a household name in the wizarding world. His famous The Tales of Peter the Bard is practically a bedtime story for every young wizard. But this book is more than just fairy tales. It contains deeper secrets. The story of the Fountain of Good Fortune and the Three Brothers alone is enough to send chills down your spine. Therefore, Peter the Bard definitely knows a lot about the Deathly Hallows, and it would be quite reasonable to say that he was the creator of the earliest saints. But Peter, who was active in the 15th and 16th centuries, is probably long dead. Ralph is more concerned about the identity of the current leader. And Grigorovich's knowledge of the saints makes it hard not to suspect that he was once a member of this organization. Ralph and Karin talked for a long time, but what she knew was useful. The boy made up his mind that he must visit Grigorovich when he got to Germany. The two wandered around the trunk until evening before returning to Volksbüttens. By then, the whole school was in chaos. Ralph had been missing for an entire afternoon, and everyone was searching for him. Even Minister Abel, upon hearing the news of the boy's disappearance, rushed back from the Ministry of Magic to direct the Aurors in a massive search of the campus. Had Ralph appeared any later, he would have already sent men deep into the Pyrenees Mountains to search. There was no other way. The boy was the hero who had saved the floating dragon ship, and he absolutely could not be harmed now, at least not in France. Ralph's reappearance brought a sigh of relief to Minister Abel, who had been terrified. He had originally intended to keep the boy for a few more days, but immediately urged his secretary to contact the German Ministry of Magic and send the restless young man to Berlin as soon as possible. That evening, Madame Maxime hosted a dinner party at Volksbüttens Castle to entertain the guests. The dinner was lavish, featuring Basque spice chicken, Normandy upside-down apple tarts, Riviera-style mussel salad, and foie gras with truffles. It primarily featured French cuisine, and the food was quite good, certainly not comparable to the culinary wasteland of British food. In the center of the hall, there was an automatically playing magical musical fountain, with the melodious strains of a violin flowing quietly, and the soft candlelight illuminating the hands holding knives. The group, still shaken by the day's ordeal, had forgotten their ordeal. They were oblivious to the outside commotion, as if dining in a cottage in a French forest. However, more than the sumptuous food, Ralph was intrigued by Volksbüttens' great hall. The magnificent carpets, with their clearly visible gold thread decorations, and the walls constructed of blue crystal, allowed the soft, pale moonlight to easily filter into the room. Even the tableware and wine glasses were made of gold and silver. He had heard Fleur describe Boxburton's luxury many times, and seeing it with his own eyes, he was certain it was true. There was no way around it. Boxburton's had the donation of the distinguished alumnus Nicholas Flamel, far surpassing Hogwarts, a rundown institution reliant on the school's board of trustees. After the dinner, for safety's sake, Madame Maxim even let Ralph sleep in the room next to hers, so close that she could react quickly in case of trouble. The next morning, Abel rushed to Boxburton's again, found Ralph having breakfast in the Great Hall, and handed him a black eagle sculpture. Mr. Scamander, this is the portkey, Abel said. You can use it to go to the German Ministry of Magic, where a wizard will meet you. Thank you, Mr. Abel. Ralph downed his oat milk in one gulp, wiped his mouth, picked up his trunk, and waved goodbye to everyone. Goodbye, Madame Maxim. Yes, see you on Halloween. Madame Maxim came over, hugged Ralph again, gave the boy a suffocating chest-crushing blow to the forehead, and then let him go. At dawn, the rising sun cast its light upon the headquarters of the German Ministry of Magic. A typical Gothic building, the ministry's roof was a forest of spires, exquisitely carved, with decorative bands of flame-shaped pointed arches and cross-shaped round windows, giving the entire building a magnificent and dignified appearance. Compared to this imposing building, the wizarding square in front of the ministry was equally impressive, a vast oval square paved with granite, with 284 columns stretching outwards, its openness and grandeur breathtaking, resembling a classic Central Park. At this time, despite it being the morning rush hour, the square was deserted and quite deserted. It had been temporarily taken over by the Aurors, and no one was allowed to enter the ministry for the time being. Because there had been no prior notice, many ministry employees who had arrived at the square using fireplaces or apparition were bewildered upon hearing the news. At the Aurors' suggestion, they could only walk to the edge of the square and wait quietly for the ministry to open. This temporary control was clearly unusual, and many speculated that a high-ranking figure was about to arrive at the Ministry of Magic. A red-haired witch whistled at an Auror clearing the area. Glick, what's going on, McClare? If only I knew. Glick shrugged. I was called here early this morning and have been patrolling for an hour, but haven't heard anything. Could it be Dumbledore, the Grand Master of the International Confederation of Wizards? McClare guessed. Grand Master Dumbledore has been to the German Ministry of Magic before. Glick shook his head, but there wasn't this level of control, was there? McClare was somewhat taken aback. Could the person coming be someone of even higher rank than Dumbledore? Such a large-scale operation naturally alerted the major newspapers in Berlin. A group of reporters, running at breakneck speed, hurriedly grabbed their cameras and waited outside the square, ready to capture first-hand information. Soon, the Minister of Magic of Germany, Claire, appeared in the square with a group of Aurors, waiting to greet the guests. Everyone stared wide-eyed, eager to catch a glimpse of the mysterious wizard. Reporters found the perfect spots to take pictures. In the ensuing silence, a blond boy appeared out of nowhere in the center of the square, carrying a black leather suitcase. The reporters with binoculars exchanged bewildered glances. Was this boy really worth the Aurors clearing the area and the Minister of Magic personally greeting him? The crowd erupted in commotion, speculating about his identity. Regardless of whether they recognized him or not, the reporters grabbed their cameras and frantically snapped photos. They even had headlines ready. Shocking. Mysterious young wizard arrives at the German Ministry of Magic. Ralph, who had arrived using a portkey, stared blankly at the scene before him. He had barely landed when he was surrounded by a dozen wizards wielding wands. This spectacle made it seem like he'd stumbled into Death Eater's lair. The crowd quickly dispersed, and a witch emerged. She was in her early 40s, tall and slender, with light brown skin and long brown hair that danced in the wind, giving her an elegant and gentle appearance. The witch also had a typical Germanic face, not overly beautiful, but very pleasing to the eye, with bright, sparkling blue eyes. "Hello, my name is Sienna Claire," she said, stepping forward and extending her hand. "I am the Minister of Magic of Germany. Welcome, Mr. Scamander." "Hello, Minister Claire." Ralph shook her hand. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 459. The Wizard Chooses His Wand. Ralph, carrying the suitcase, quietly followed Claire into a long Rococo-style corridor. At the end of the corridor was a large wooden door. Claire pushed it open and entered, turning to say, "This is my office. You can come directly to me if you need anything." Ralph thanked her and followed Claire into the office. The room was large, with milky white marble floors, lifelike murals adorning the walls, a huge chandelier hanging overhead, and a row of arched windows offering a panoramic view of the sunlit Wizarding Square. Claire gestured for Rove to sit down, poured him a cup of tea, and then sat beside him, saying, "I received a letter from Abel, the French Minister of Magic. He said you've captured 2 prisoners. Where are they now?" "I've put them in a safe place," Rove replied, taking a sip of tea. "I'll hand them over to you as soon as possible, but give me some time." "Oh," Claire glanced at the boy, her eyes flickering. "You've locked them in a box. You can't bring them out in front of me, can you?" Even with his excellent acting skills, Rove almost lost his composure when she saw through him. He could only blink, looking at Claire with a puzzled expression, as if he didn't understand what she was saying. Claire looked at the seemingly innocent but actually quite mischievous boy and said seriously, "Compared to those 2 criminals, Mr. Scamander, I'm more concerned about your suitcase. I received intelligence that you brought a suitcase full of magical creatures to Germany. Is that true?" Seeing the boy's momentary confusion, Claire chuckled and said, "Don't be nervous, child, I was just teasing you. By the way, how has your grandfather been lately?" "He's all right." Ralph raised his eyebrows and asked cautiously, "You know my grandfather?" "Yes," Claire nodded and said, "More than 20 years ago, I had just graduated from Durmstrang and was working in the Department of Magical Creature Management and Control. Once, I encountered a sudden case. A goblin had taken a young wizard hostage. It was Mr. Scamander who helped me calm the goblin and rescue the child, thus keeping my job." Goblins are magical creatures similar to elves. They are larger than goblins, averaging 3 feet tall, with long, pointed faces, and they especially like to eat children. Newt had spent some time in the Black Forest of Germany to solve the problem of the evil spirit infestation, and happened to help Claire there. Hearing Minister Claire say this, Ralph breathed a sigh of relief. So it was an acquaintance. "Why didn't you say so sooner?" Look how scared he was. "I've been inside Newt's box, and seeing the box you're holding, I knew there must be a group of magical creatures inside." Claire smiled, then reminded him, "However, the International Wizarding Federation is currently in session, so you must be very careful not to let them escape." "Don't worry about that," Ralph quickly assured her, "I've never made that mistake." Compared to Newt's tendency to let magical creatures escape so easily, Ralph was indeed much more cautious, or perhaps it was because he kept too few little animals. Claire stood up, gazing at the now uncontrolled square, and said softly, "Rover, the news of your rescue of the floating dragon ship hasn't been announced yet, but it won't stay hidden for long. The reporters will definitely harass you. You can stay at the Ministry of Magic until Dumbledore arrives in Berlin." "No need," Rover shook his head, refusing. "Minister Claire, I already have a place to stay." "Where?" "Grigovich. Wand Shop. The Brandenburg Gate, located at the intersection of Unter den Linden and Strasse June 17 in central Berlin, was originally a city gate in the Berlin city wall, named after its connection to Brandenburg. At this moment, 2 figures appeared on the street not far from the Brandenburg Gate. Rover had left the Ministry of Magic after handing over the prisoner and followed Corin here. Corin was a local Berliner, and with her there was no need to trouble Minister Claire, even though she was Newt's acquaintance. Besides, Rover had a lot of questions he wanted to ask Grigovich, and this was a good opportunity to have a thorough discussion. Corin gazed at the Brandenburg Gate and exclaimed excitedly, "This is the entrance to Under the Linden Trees, as famous as Diagon Alley in London." Diagon Alley in London, Hidden Place in Paris, and Under the Linden Trees in Berlin are 3 of Europe's most famous wizarding streets. And Gregorwich's Wand Shop is located here. Crossing the square, they arrived at a secluded corner where a chariot drawn by 4 bronze horses stood. After a wary glance around, Corin reached out and touched the bronze chariot, disappearing from the spot, with Ralph following closely behind. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself on a winding, seemingly endless cobblestone street. Wizards thronged the area, and various magical shops lined both sides of the road. Corin led Ralph through the twists and turns until they found a wand shop with a gleaming gold sign above the door, Gregorwich Fine Wand Shop. The shop was small, its entrance no more than 3 meters wide. Inside, 2 rows of tall shelves lined the left and right, filled with wands. At the far end of the shop, a short, stout old man with snow-white hair and a bushy beard lay reclining in a chair, resting with his eyes closed. He held a folded fan, tapping it lightly against his palm and humming a tune. He heard footsteps but didn't open his eyes, instead lazily saying, "The measuring tape is on the table, it will automatically measure your height. The wand price list is on the wall, you can choose the core and wood yourself." "Grandpa, it's me," Karin called out. The old man snapped his eyes open. Seeing the girl, he was initially delighted, but quickly hardened his expression and said, "Karin, where have you been all this time?" "I've been in Durmstrang," the girl replied, running over and gently massaging the old man's shoulders. "You're still lying to me," Grigorovich sneered. "I received a letter from Ollivander saying you went to see him. I also wrote to Karkaroff, and he replied that you were fired by Durmstrang." "Well," the girl stuck out her tongue and smiled sheepishly. The old man, with the stern expression of an elder, scolded, "I told you to behave yourself, now you're fired." The girl pulled out one hand and waved it vigorously, complaining sweetly, I know, Grandpa, my ears are going to fall off." Grigorovich then looked at Rolf, his expression softening. "And this gentleman is..." "Hello, my name is Rolf Scamander." Rolf smiled. "Rolf is a friend I met in England," Karin quickly said. "By the way, Grandpa, he greatly admires your wand-making skills. Could you make him a powerful wand?" "Child, where's your old wand?" "Let me see it," Grigorovich said. Rolf took his wand out of his pocket and handed it to the old man. Grigorovich held the wand, turning it over and over in front of him, examining it carefully. "If I'm not mistaken, this is a Wolf product." "That's right," Rolf nodded. He wasn't using a wand made by Ollivanders, but by Wolf. He was one of the 4 major wandmakers in North America and a distinguished wandmaker. "Grandpa, how did you know?" Karin asked curiously. Wolf's wands are renowned for their exquisite craftsmanship, and he particularly liked using Thunderbird tail feathers as cores. "This wand has a Thunderbird tail feather core. I remember you saying that while Thunderbird tail feather wands possess great power, they are difficult to wield," Karin said. "That's right. Only exceptionally talented wizards choose such wands," Grigorovich nodded. Rolf listened silently to Gregovich's words, then suddenly frowned and said, "Mr. Gregovich, I remember Mr. Ollivander always saying, 'The wand chooses the wizard.'" "Wrong, child, of course not the wand chooses the wizard," Gregovich retorted, "it's always the wizard who chooses the wand." Chapter 460 The Relic of Death. Whether the wand chooses the wizard or the wizard chooses the wand is a classic debate in wandology. Since the invention of the wand, it has been a subject of constant debate among wand makers, with each side holding its own opinion, resulting in a millennial-long controversy. Like the debate over sweet versus savory tofu pudding, each side has always viewed the other as heretical. Grigorovich firmly believes that the wizard chooses the wand. A wand is merely a magical object with perception. A wizard can use it to channel their magical power, thereby concentrating the effect to achieve more complex purposes. Grigorovich's eyes shone brightly as he vividly described, "It's like a pair of shoes. Wearing them protects your feet, allowing you to walk faster, more steadily, and more safely, but it's never the shoes choosing the feet, only the feet choose the shoes." The old man paused, then continued, "If it were truly the wand choosing the wizard, those not chosen by it shouldn't be able to cast spells when using the wand, but the truth is, a wizard can use any wand." Grigorovich pointed to the ones on the shelf with his right hand, twirling his finger. "You can pick any one and cast spells, and the final choice depends on the wizard themselves. That's what it means for a wizard to choose a wand. Why are some wands so easy to use, while others are so difficult to use?" Ralph asked again, puzzled. "It's a matter of break-in," Grigorovich explained patiently, his pace unhurried. "Shoes that are close to your foot size are definitely more comfortable than shoes that are too different. The same applies to wands. Some wands are similar to the wizard's personality, making them easy to use the first time, others are too different, making them stiff and requiring a long break-in period. The job of a wand shop is to choose the one that best suits the customer from among many wands." The old man stood up and slowly paced back and forth. "But even so, the chosen wand cannot be a perfect fit for the wizard. After all, these wands are pre-made products. Just like standard-sized clothes, no matter how close to your size, will never be as well-fitting as tailor-made clothes." Ralph seemed thoughtful. "However, wands themselves are learning machines," Grigorovich said. "They learn from the wizard until they establish the closest possible connection with him. Therefore, when I sell wands, I always prioritize power. As for the issue of compatibility, good enough is fine. I'm not as meticulous as Ollivander. And what does the power of a wand depend on? Ralph asked curiously. Wood and color, Grigorovich said succinctly. The same wizard, using a dragon heart nerve wand and a unicorn hair wand with similar compatibility, will unleash significantly stronger magic with the former. Therefore, wand makers always tend to use powerful magical creatures. What about the Elder Wand? Ralph suddenly asked. And why is it so special and powerful? Hearing the word Elder Wand, the old man was clearly surprised. He looked at the boy hesitantly, and after a long while, said in a deep voice, "Child, you know about the Elder Wand." Ralph nodded. The Elder Wand, the Death Wand, the Wand of Fate, it has appeared under different names for many centuries, and everyone knows it. Many people think it's just a ridiculous legend, Grigorovich sighed. But the Elder Wand has a clear historical record, though there have been interruptions, long interruptions. It disappears from people's sight, temporarily lost or hidden, but it always reappears. It also has certain identifiable characteristics that anyone who has studied wand science will recognize. There are some written records, some quite obscure, which I have studied specifically, and those records have a certain degree of authenticity. Grigorovich paused for a moment, then slowly said, according to those records, the Elder Wand, like other wands, possesses a learning ability. But the Elder Wand's learning ability is unmatched even by the most outstanding wizards. Each of its owners was a very powerful wizard. Over the long years, it followed those wizards, accumulating countless knowledge, thus becoming increasingly powerful. The Elder Wand's legacy is often accompanied by bloodshed, and it has gained rich experience in battle. It can even cast the most appropriate spells to fight enemies without its owner's command. The Elder Wand can cast spells on its own, Ralph asked in surprise. That's right, Gregor said seriously. I've never seen a wand with such self-awareness in any other wand. It's like a powerful wizard, possessing vast magical knowledge and formidable combat experience, to the point that most people are no match for it. That's why the Elder Wand is called the wand that never loses. Grandpa, can't you make a similar wand with your abilities? Karn asked. I can't. Gregor shook his head and smiled wryly. The Elder Wand's wood is elderwood, and the core is thestral tail feathers. I've used this combination before, but it wasn't any stronger than other wands. The Elder Wand's power has nothing to do with the materials themselves, but rather with the forging process. Gregor sighed. Its maker, Antioch Peveril, likely possessed a skill that no existing wandmaker could master, much like the goblin's forging of weapons. Could it really be like the story of the three brothers, where Antioch Peveril received the help of death? Karin guessed. It's not impossible, Grigorovich said solemnly. Who can be sure that death doesn't exist? Is the pursuit of those saints really just an illusion? Ralph and Karin exchanged a glance, and the girl spoke up. Grandpa, do you know something? Tell us in detail. Why are you suddenly interested in this? Grigorovich looked at his granddaughter and asked with a smile. When I talked to you about the Elder Wand and the Deathly Hallows before, you were always impatient, thinking I was just telling stories. Karin explained. Grandpa, we encountered saints on the road, so we wanted to learn more about the Deathly Hallows and death. The girl briefly recounted her encounters on the road, of course omitting her smuggling. Saints would actually attack a floating dragon ship. Grigorovich narrowed his eyes, puzzled. That's strange. They were only interested in the Deathly Hallows. They never participate in such terrorist attacks. Grandpa, how do you know they never participate in such attacks? Karin asked. The Elder Wand is an incredibly alluring object for those of us who study wands. Grigorovich sighed. Back then, in my search for it, I joined the saints and rose to a very high rank, so I know the saints quite well. You ask if death exists. The saints possess an immortal corpse, said to be the relic of death. Chapter 461 The Guidance of Death. Hearing Grigorovich's words, Ralph was extremely surprised. He never imagined that the saints, who didn't even possess a single deathly hallow, would have something as high class as the relic of death. Karin was even more incredulous, questioning, Grandpa, could it be fake, just to scam old people like you? Like how you were tricked into buying a bunch of health supplements last year? It was all a scam. Grigorovich was furious at the mention of this, angrily saying, I only got scammed because I trusted acquaintances too much. Besides, I was only in my early 30s when I joined the saints, not an old man, young and inexperienced, Karin said, arms crossed, clicking her tongue. It's even more normal to be fooled. Shut up. Grigorovich glared at his granddaughter who had contradicted him, saying, Of course I couldn't have been fooled. In fact, that relic showed me extraordinary power. What power? The girl pressed. While the saints were praying to that relic, we entered a dreamlike illusion, the old man recalled. Rav rarely showed such shock. You've been to the enchanted realm? Karin asked almost simultaneously. What is the enchanted realm? A place between life and death, Rav explained softly, looking at the girl. You can think of it as the place where one lingers before death. Grigovich stared at Rav in surprise. She hadn't expected him to know even such a secret as the enchanted realm. He was truly remarkable. That's right, I lingered there for a long time and even saw death. Karin's eyes widened, her face filled with disbelief, and she emphasized, the death from the three brothers story. Yes, Grigorovich said seriously, the scene in the illusory realm is a projection of the memories of those who enter. I was on Linden Street, and there wasn't a single wizard on the entire street. After sitting for a long time in front of the wand shop, a hooded customer came. The old man lowered his voice and said, he couldn't see his face, he was tall, and he said he was death, asking me what I wanted. Ralph and Karin held their breath, listening intently to Grigorovich's story. The old man's voice was hoarse as he said, I was so obsessed with the Elder One that I asked Death to tell me its location. Death guided me. The old man's face showed reminiscence as he said, later, when I left the illusory realm, I realized that all the saints had entered the illusory realm, but I was the only one who saw death. Ralph and Karin exchanged glances but remained silent. I didn't tell anyone about this. Instead, I left the saints and went to find the Elder Wand alone, Grigorovich continued. At that time, the Elder Wand had been missing from the wizarding world for nearly 50 years. It was last seen in the hands of the infamous Lothius, who killed the horrible wizard Barnabas and obtained the Elder Wand from him. But who killed Lothius is unknown. Many claim to have taken his life, including his own mother. I was skeptical at the time, but following Death's guidance, I found the wizard Akis, who is already very old and wanted to take the Elder Wand to his grave. The old man's tone suddenly became agitated. So, I easily took the Elder Wand from him. I studied the Elder Wand for a long time. It taught me a lot about wand making, and my wand making skills began to improve rapidly. The ones I made were always much more powerful than others. Even Ollivander was far inferior to me in this respect. As Grigorovich recounted the details, Karin listened in stunned silence, completely oblivious to the fact that her grandfather had once possessed the Elder Wand. Is that wand still in your possession? Karin asked hastily. It's gone. The old man's expression somber, he said with a self-deprecating laugh. I made a very foolish mistake back then, going around proclaiming that I possessed the Elder Wand. Grandpa, why did you tell everyone? Karin asked, puzzled. Instead of hiding the wand, I was blinded by the Elder Wand. The old man sighed. You've never held the Elder Wand, you don't know its terrifying power. With it in my hand, wizards who were much more powerful than me were no match for me. I thought no wizard could take it from me. Grigorovich paused for a moment, then continued, moreover, I wanted to become the world's best wand maker. I wanted people to know that I was researching and replicating the Elder Wand's properties and applying them to the ones I made. Sure enough, my reputation soared, and wizards all over Europe came to buy my wands, even in England with Ollivander. And then what happened? Karin asked curiously. How did it get lost? One day, while I was working, a blond boy broke into my room and stole my wand. Grigorovich sighed. When I chased after him, he struck me with a stunning charm, and that's how I lost the Elder Wand. The blond boy, Karin asked curiously. Did you go looking for the thief? No, Grigorovich gave an unexpected answer. At first, I really wanted to know who that person was, and I wanted to get my wand back. Grigorovich sat back down in his chair and looked outside. Just as I was about to leave, looking at all the wands in the room, I suddenly calmed down and thought that losing the Elder Wand might be a good thing. A good thing? Karin asked, puzzled. It certainly is a good thing, Ralph chimed in. The Elder Wand, as a coveted object, has a bloody history, usually changing owners through murder. Mr. Grigorovich, as the owner of the Elder Wand, is safe and sound despite losing it. Isn't that a good thing? Yes, the old man looked at the boy approvingly. That's what I thought at the time, so it really is a good thing. Karin patted her chest with relief. But you still need to be careful, Rove said, looking at Grigorovich. You once revealed that you had obtained the Elder Wand, but no one knows you've lost it. If someone is looking for the Elder Wand, they might find you. Grigorovich nodded, stroking the chair, his weathered face filled with reminiscence. Seeing the old man's weariness, Rove interrupted Karin, who wanted to continue asking questions, and stood up, saying, "Let's stop here for today. Karin, take me to my room." Karin saw the boy's signal, stood up as well, said goodbye to the old man, and led him up the stairs. Karin whispered, "Rove, do you believe what my grandfather said?" "What, you don't believe him?" Rove asked. "I don't believe the saints. I always feel my grandfather has been deceived by them." Karin shook her head. "Why do you say that? Think about it. Death can actually die?" Karin raised an eyebrow. "Clearly, that's not Death's corpse." Ralph was speechless for a moment, but then he suddenly remembered Hufflepuff's story about the ancient wizard. That ancient wizard couldn't be killed. His body was cut into 5 pieces and hidden by 5 pure-blood wizards. Death's relics, could they be related to that ancient wizard? Chapter 462 Erskine Prison. As payment for helping Karin smuggle herself across the border, Ralph naturally moved into her house. As the saying goes, proximity breeds opportunity, and he certainly couldn't miss this chance. Every spare moment, he would seek out a girl to delve into, wand-making. This was a completely unfamiliar field for Ralph, and he was extremely interested. However, wand-making was a complex and mysterious magical discipline, no easier than transfiguration or potions. There were over 60,000 types of wood alone, and although a large portion was unsuitable for wand-making, the sheer number one it needed to recognize was staggering. Ralph also demonstrated a special ability to accelerate plant growth, which shocked and delighted Korin and Grigorovich. The age of the tree significantly affected the power of a wand, and the boy's ability to accelerate this process made him a natural tree grower. Thus, whenever Ralph had free time, Karin would drag him to the grove to help her cultivate plants, leaving him exhausted from the constant toil and exploitation. One could only say, it was a bittersweet experience. Of course, while studying intensively, Ralph didn't forget the task Dumbledore had given him, to go to Erskinian prison. Erskinian had an extremely long history, established in the 15th century by the Teutonic Knights, a Germanic crusade. Its purpose was to imprison heretics and wizards. In the early 19th century, Napoleon disbanded the Teutonic Knights, and Erskinian prison fell into disrepair. However, a few decades later, it was requisitioned by the German Ministry of Magic and transformed into a prison for wizards. At this moment, on a hillside, 2 figures appeared out of nowhere. Ralph stopped and looked into the distance, seeing a low, octagonal stone house. Its vaulted roof was dilapidated, but it looked very sturdy. "That's Exta prison," Karin said softly, standing beside the boy. "They're all death row inmates here, and visits aren't allowed without proper documentation." "Ralph, are you sure you want to go in?" Ralph nodded and said, "Karin, you stay here and wait for me to come out." "No, I'm going in with you," Karin insisted. "If something happens to you, you'll have someone to help you. I'm not here to break you out." Ralph chuckled. What could possibly happen? Even so, he led the girl towards the mountain top. They soon arrived at a door, pushed it open, and entered a dark room. A flickering candle eerily illuminated a jailer, who looked up at the sound of footsteps. By the candlelight, Ralph saw that the jailer was short, with a mouthful of rotten brown teeth and small, dark eyes. He was also fiddling with a magical creature, no bigger than a fingernail, resembling a crab, but with a scorpion-like, eerie green stinger at its tail. Ralph recognized it as a young scorpion-tailed beast. The jailer grinned, revealing his rotten teeth. "Little darling, we have a guest." The scorpion-tailed beast raised its pincers and hissed at Ralph and Karin. Ralph took a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to the man, saying, "Mr. Monet, I need to visit you. This is a document signed for me by the International Wizarding Federation." Monet took the paper, glanced at it, saw Dumbledore's signature and the seal of the President of the International Wizarding Federation, crumpled the document into a ball, and tossed it aside. Behind the man was a wall made of many small squares. Suddenly, a magical seal jumped over, opened its mouth, bit the crumpled paper, and chewed it with its serrated teeth, making a crunching sound. Monet picked up a candle again and carefully examined the boy. The candle flame flickered, and shadows swayed around him, making the room seem even darker and colder. "You are Ralph Scamander, you know me." Ralph narrowed his eyes. "I saw you in the paper this morning," Monet grinned, waving his wand. A greasy newspaper flew out of the trash can, the front page featuring a picture of Ralph. German newspapers had been scrambling to report on Ralph lately. His arrival in Germany had required the Minister of Magic to clear the area and personally receive him. Many were curious about his identity. While Ralph might not be internationally renowned, he was famous in England, making it easy for reporters to uncover his identity. The stamp, having swallowed the document, let out a burp and opened its mouth as if to satisfy Monet. The stamp could verify the authenticity of documents, its appearance confirmed its authenticity. Monet stiffly stood up and began scanning Ralph and Karin with a machine. Mr. Scamander, your box and wand must be placed here, Ralph calmly replied. Of course, he placed his wand and box on the table, and Karin also took out a wand. Not enough, Monet stared at the girl, grinning. You have more wands in your sleeves, the girl pouted, reluctantly pulling out 2 wands from her sleeves. Monet bent down, reaching into a small bucket filled with wriggling larvae. With a nauseating splatter, he picked out 2 larvae, shook them in his hand, and they trembled, transforming into fireflies. He placed a larvae into a small tin lantern. The fireflies fluttered their wings, and the lantern emitted a faint, trembling light. Take these 2 lanterns, and don't let them go out. Ralph and Karin each took a lantern and walked towards a door, illuminating the dark path. Karin tapped the lantern, puzzled. Ralph, what's this? A yellow-edged firefly, used to deal with this scorpion-tailed beast, Ralph explained. At the very bottom of this prison lives a scorpion-tailed beast that dislikes the smell of yellow-edged fireflies. Carrying it in will ensure you're not attacked, the boy cautioned, so you have to hold it firmly. Don't let the lantern fall and kill the yellow-edged firefly, Karin nodded nervously. Ralph held the firefly above his head. With each step, the shadows on the wall moved, as if they were all turning to watch him. Karin asked softly, Ralph, who are you going to see? I don't know who I'm going to see. Ralph shook his head. The boy was telling the truth, his real purpose was a cell, not a specific prisoner. Years ago, after Grindelwald's defeat, more than half of the witchcraftians were imprisoned here, including Grindelwald himself. But not long after, at Dumbledore's insistence, Grindelwald was transferred to Nurmengard. However, although the first Dark Lord was imprisoned here for a short time, he hid an item here, for nearly 50 years. Ralph's mission was to retrieve Grindelwald's possession. Chapter 463 Grindelwald's Collection. The long, spiraling staircase wound its way down. Ralph descended slowly, each step making a soft tap-tap sound. Suddenly, he stopped. The girl behind him, caught off guard, bumped into his back, instantly losing her balance and stumbling towards the side without a railing. Fortunately, Ralph caught Karin around the waist in time, pulling her back. The girl's legs gave way, and she slumped onto the steps, panting heavily. Still shaken, she asked, Why did you stop so suddenly? There was a noise, Ralph whispered. Karin calmed her rapid breathing and listened intently. Sure enough, she heard a faint creaking sound in the distance. The girl held her lamp above her head, the flickering light of the fireflies illuminated a wider area. She strained to see into the darkness and saw a small scorpion-tailed beast appear. Then another. Soon, a large swarm of small, eerie green scorpion-tailed beasts followed closely behind, densely covering the entire wall and rapidly crawling downwards. Karin, watching the crawling insects, was overcome with trypophobia. She felt as if thousands of insects were crawling all over her body, and couldn't help but gasp. Hearing her cry, the scorpion-tailed beasts creaked and scurried towards Ralph and Karin along the rock face. The girl wanted to run away and find somewhere to hide, but Ralph grabbed her arm and gently comforted her, Don't be afraid. Hold on to your firefly lamp, they won't attack you. Karin obeyed the boy's words and stood obediently in place, but still clung tightly to his elbow out of fear, as if that would give her some courage. Sure enough, the small scorpion-tailed beast stopped about half a meter away from the two of them, looked them over for a moment, and then continued crawling downwards. Karin sighed, wiped the sweat from her brow, and asked curiously, Where are they going? There's a deep pit at the very bottom of this prison. A huge scorpion lives there, and these little scorpions are its offspring. Karin peered down, but it was dark below. She couldn't see the pit, much less the scorpion. How do you know that? The girl looked at Rove in surprise. He, an Englishman, seemed to know this place inside and out, as if he'd been here before. I heard it from my grandfather, Rove explained. My great-grandfather was imprisoned in Erskineville prison, and my grandfather came here to break him out. Karin muttered to herself, Is this family a family of hereditary criminals? Alright, let's continue. Rove started walking down again. They soon reached the bottom of the prison, walking along a corridor. One side of the corridor encircled a large, circular pit, and the other side was lined with rows of small, damp, and foul-smelling cells. The corridor reeked of rotting food, and reptiles were everywhere. Karin nearly stepped on a rat. Seeing people coming down, many prisoners stood up, straining to see what was happening. Some prisoners spoke, urging Rolf and Karin to come closer. Others shouted, asking what year it was. Still others, seemingly insane, pounded on the bars, their flesh mangled, refusing to stop until they finally gripped the bars tightly, cursing the German Ministry of Magic. A wizard even swore an oath, willing to become a slave, just to be rescued. Rolf ignored them all, speaking softly in the darkness as he walked. Karin, you mustn't go near them. Once these prisoners leave their cells, they'll be attacked by the scorpion-tailed beasts at the bottom of the pit. They were only safe with a firefly lamp, so they desperately want to take it from us. Karin nodded thoughtfully. After walking for a while, Rolf finally arrived at a cell. Peering through the iron bars, he saw a man curled up in bed. He noticed Rolf and Karin, but pretended not to, though his shifty, cold gaze subtly watched them. Wait here for me, I'll be out in a bit, Rolf said. Karin looked at the tightly closed cell door and asked, do you have the key to the cell? No, Rolf shook his head. I don't need that. Rolf handed Karin the firefly lamp, then his body suddenly shrank like a snake, disappearing through the gaps in the iron bars. Karin stared in disbelief. After entering the cell, Rolf's form returned to normal, and he gently covered his nose. The smell here was as foul as a toilet. Stale straw lay scattered on the floor, rustling underfoot. A bucket of overflowing excrement stood against one wall, while a wizard huddled in a ball on the other. Rove walked towards the prisoner lying on the ground, about to check if he was alive, when the prisoner suddenly stood up and lunged at the boy. Rove had already sensed the danger, dodging the insidious pounce and simultaneously kicking the prisoner. The man fell to the ground, knocking over a latrine bucket, scattering filthy, foul-smelling brown mud all over the ground, which was absorbed by the straw. Rove looked at the man. He must have been in prison for a long time, as thin as a scarecrow, with a rat-like face covered by a bushy beard, unkempt hair tangled and hanging down to his shoulders, his clothes tattered, and his face pale and withered. The man staggered and spun around, cursing loudly, his eyes burning with rage. Hand over the firefly lamp, he shouted. Rolf ignored him completely, staring at the wall, searching for something. Seeing the boy distracted, the man lunged again. Rolf then raised his arm, and the man was horrified to find the chains binding his hands rattling, then uncontrollably tightening around his neck. The chains wrapped around the man's throat and pulled him back violently. He fell to his knees, struggling to gasp for air, only managing a faint, terrifying cough. The chains dragged the man, slamming him against the wall. Blood gushed from his head, and he instantly lost consciousness. Rolf finally found what he was looking for. He went to a corner, bent down to examine it, and saw the symbol of the Deathly Hallows engraved on a black brick. Rolf softly chanted a spell, then cut his finger. Blood flowed onto the symbol, hissing like hot iron touching cold water. The floor tiles began to shift, pushing everything aside to reveal a narrow passage, about the size of a person, empty and pitch black, like a bottomless abyss. Rolf jumped down, quickly reaching an even smaller room. Standing in the darkness, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine, sensing something staring at him. He snapped his fingers, and a ball of flame floated before him. Using the faint light, Rolf peered into the deepest part of the room, taking a step back in horror at what he saw. A pale, ghostly face, with lifeless, empty eye sockets, stared directly at him. It was a skull, thanks to and for their generous donations. Chapter 464 Grindelwald's Son. Ralph squinted, scrutinizing the strange skull. It seemed to be made of crystal, shimmering in the candlelight. However, the skull had a wide, flat mouth, a long skull with a relatively flat top, a wider back, and a row of sharp, long teeth, clearly not a human skull, but more like that of some magical creature. The flames blazed fiercely, casting long shadows on the stone walls. Using the light, Ralph quickly scanned the room. The room was empty. A square hole had been carved into the wall in front of him, like a closet, where the skull was placed. It seemed to be the item Dumbledore had asked Ralph to take. Just as the boy reached for the skull, it suddenly opened its mouth, making a creaking, vibrating sound. Then, two blood-red human eyes abruptly appeared in the empty eye sockets. The eyes rolled around for a moment before slowly stopping, looking at Ralph. The boy's scalp tingled, and he instinctively took 2 steps back. The skull stared intently at Ralph, its voice hoarse and smoky. "Where is Grindelwald?" "Grindelwald is in Nurmengard," Ralph said cautiously, his eyes fixed on the skull. "He can't come here easily. I'm here to retrieve you for him." "What's your relationship with Grindelwald?" the skull asked again. Ralph was momentarily at a loss. Should he say he was Grindelwald's ex-boyfriend's student, or the grandson of his ex-boyfriend's best friend? He thought for a moment, then said softly, "I'm Dumbledore's student." "Dumbledore?" the skull sneered, its voice stiff. "Grindelwald's hooking up with that guy again." Ralph wasn't sure if the skull was describing a relationship or some kind of action. He didn't answer, but instead asked, "And who are you?" "I am the son of Scylla, the undead, the avenger, the ruler and protector of the island, the immortal Dragon King." The skull rattled off a string of titles comparable to Mother of Dragons, but Ralph only remembered Scylla. Sikoris's son. He remembered Marcella mentioning that the three mermaid sisters guarding the Fountain of Good Fortune were named Parcelope, Sirens, and Sikoris. Ralph raised an eyebrow and asked, "Do you know Parcelope?" "She's my mother's sister." "A traitor," the skeleton roared in a shrill voice. "You know her?" "No, but I've heard of her." Ralph chuckled. "You're from that island of the Fountain of Good Fortune, right? How did you end up here?" "Grindelwald brought me here," the skeleton said hoarsely, its voice dry and raspy. "But that liar, he said he'd help me get revenge, and then he left me here for decades." The skeleton cursed Grindelwald with resentment. Ralph, growing impatient, interrupted, "Your mother is Sikoris. Who's your father?" The skeleton suddenly fell silent. Ralph narrowed his eyes. Surely it couldn't be Grindelwald. In the silent corridor, Karin, carrying a lantern, waited anxiously for Ralph. He entered the cell, opened a hole in the floor, and crawled inside. A long time passed, and he didn't emerge, leaving her wondering if something had happened to him. Just then, an aged voice suddenly rang out from the cell on the left. "Young lady, how about we make a deal?" Karin turned her head and saw a thin old man standing at the cell door, his hands gripping the bars. His face was ashen and haggard, his cheeks gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his hair white. "What kind of deal?" Karin asked casually. "I have golden gringotts," the old man grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "Countless gold. I can give it all to you. I'll tell you where the vault key is. In exchange, give me one of your firefly lanterns. How about that?" "Really a lot of gold?" Karin deliberately feigned a greedy expression. "There's indeed a lot. All of it can be yours." The old man's cheek was close to the fence, tempting her. "You'll have more gold than you can ever use in your lifetime. You can enjoy unimaginable happiness." "Then I want 1,000,000 galleons." Karin smiled at him. "If you give it to me, I'll give you the lanterns." The old man's smile froze instantly, then his face darkened. "Why don't you want a mountain of gold?" "Then I want a mountain of gold." Karin laughed. "You said it." The old man's face immediately darkened, and he roared, "You're courting death. Since you've refused my deal, then let's die here together." He widened his eyes, chanting a spell, and a ball of purple light shot through the fence at high speed. Karin hadn't expected the old man to be able to cast spells without a wand. She had no wand and could only retreat. But the spell wasn't aimed at her, but at the two lanterns in her hands. The purple light struck the lanterns, and the glass dome shattered, the two fireflies breaking free and flying into the sky. The old man laughed loudly. From within the deep pit, a low roar suddenly echoed, accompanied by a sharp whooshing sound. A massive tail twisted in a huge arc and stabbed fiercely at Karin. Karin dodged to the side in a panic, the cell door instantly smashing to pieces. The spiked tail shifted its target, flying towards the prisoner who had been knocked unconscious by a rove. The sharp spikes pierced his chest. The prisoner awoke with a piercing pain, letting out a heart-wrenching scream as he pressed his hand to his wound, his arm soaked in crimson blood. The next second, the tail dragged the prisoner's body towards the pit, followed by the sounds of a scorpion-tailed beast devouring a corpse. The fine, dense tearing and chewing sounds sent chills down Karin's spine. Her face grew increasingly pale, and she had no choice but to run through the broken cell door towards the room. Seeing the whole Rove had opened, the girl slid in and disappeared inside. Rove was communicating with the head when he heard shouts behind him. He turned around and saw Karin. "What happened?" "Those two lanterns were broken by a prisoner," Karin explained anxiously. "He can cast spells without a staff." Ralph gave a soft "oh," then picked up the head and said, "That's troublesome." Before he finished speaking, 4 or 5 fist-sized bulges appeared on the previously flat ground, their tops churning with oil like fountains, from which emerged small scorpion-tailed beasts. The scorpions swarmed like a tide, quickly trapping Ralph and Karin in the middle. Ralph stared at the scorpion-tailed beasts and suddenly asked, "Karin, can you dance, huh?" Karin stared blankly at the boy. "Come, I'll teach you a dance, thanks to I love a piece of wood, good days of the yordle, and disciple doesn't have to be inferior to master for their generous donations." Chapter 465 Rove's End of Life Care. When Karin heard that Rove was going to teach her to dance, she almost thought she had misheard. She looked at the boy in astonishment, only to find that he didn't seem to be joking. Because Rove had already spread his legs, raised his arms, clenched his fingers, and was taking scissor-like steps, strangely twisting his body to the side. "Hurry up," Rove urged, "follow my steps." Karin stared at the bizarre movements, barely suppressing her laughter. Seeing the boy glare at her, she quickly held her breath and imitated his movements. The girl asked awkwardly and shyly, "What are we doing?" "You can call it the Helios dance," Rove explained, wiggling his hips. "It's a mimicry technique that can alleviate the violent tendencies of Helios, making them think we are their own kind and won't attack us." "Does it really work?" Karin was very skeptical. "Obviously," Rove raised his chin and pointed forward. "Very effective." Following the boy's gaze, Karin looked and was immediately speechless. Seeing the group of small scorpion-tailed beasts surrounding them, she realized they hadn't attacked them anymore. Instead, they gathered together and imitated the boy's movements, crawling sideways. Karin became happy, and now, disregarding her shame, she vigorously twisted her waist and hips. "Karin, this is the scorpion-tailed beast dance. It's a dance, but more importantly, it's art, and it includes aesthetics." Rove glanced at her, speechless. "Can you stop shaking like an electric eel? People would think you've been electrocuted." The girl laughed angrily. "I'm clearly imitating your movements perfectly." "Far from it." "Okay," Rove rolled his eyes. "You need to point your toes outward at a 45-degree angle. Slowly inhale, then slowly twist your knees towards one toe, exhaling as you slowly step sideways." Rove demonstrated it to her again. "Your movements look like a crab," Karin chuckled. "Not as good as my electric eel dance." Well, Rove's scorpion beast dance did indeed incorporate a crab's gait. After all, his best breakthrough move in basketball in his previous life was the Emperor's 6-step layup crab walk. The two of them wiggled and moved towards the cave entrance when suddenly they heard a crunching sound under their feet. Rove immediately stopped. The little scorpion beasts also stopped, looking up at him. Rove lowered his head and slowly, carefully, lifted his right foot. There, on the sole of his shoe, was a small, flattened scorpion beast. The group of little scorpion beasts hissed and howled angrily at him, then crunched away, seemingly going to tell their mother. Rove picked up the small scorpion beast from under his foot, and suddenly, a ding sounded in his brain. A wild scorpion-tailed beast with its molten cord detected, triggering side quest 1, heal the dying scorpion-tailed beast. Reward, scorpion sting. By consuming magic power, extract calcium from its body to create a venomous stinger as hard as bone, which can be launched in dangerous situations. Side quest 2, complete 100% taming of the scorpion-tailed beast. Reward, scorpion whip, a tail whip that can retract at will, with small barbs protruding from the middle and lower part. When inserted into an enemy's body, it can hook onto the enemy and prevent movement. Ralph stroked the weak scorpion-tailed beast, giving it a second chance at life, and then put it in his pocket. They climbed up the passage, and just as they were about to return to their cell, a giant barbed stinger stabbed at them, its gleaming venomous needle forcing them to retreat. Karin asked in a low voice, "Does the scorpion-tailed beast's dance work on it?" "It worked a little for a moment," Rove said, shrugging. "But one of its offspring was just crushed, so it's probably useless now." "It shouldn't be very hungry," Karin guessed. "It just ate a death row inmate." "That's worse," Rove shook his head. "A corpse is just a mouthful for it, something to whet its appetite. It's really hungry right now. Don't worry, we need a little help." Rove put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled. The magical whistle echoed throughout the building. "Wait a moment, the little guy will bring us firefly lanterns." Karin breathed a sigh of relief, and seeing the boy heading towards the cave exit again, she hurriedly asked, "Where are you going?" "I'm just killing time anyway. I'm going to find the prisoner who broke the firefly lantern," Rove said calmly with a faint smile. "Before he leaves, I'll give him some end-of-life care. It's my humanitarian duty as a veterinarian." Rove climbed along the cave entrance into the cage, and the scorpion-tailed beast's enormous tail immediately lashed out like a whip towards his chest. The boy remained expressionless, letting the stinger strike. The long stinger, gleaming with an eerie green light, failed to pierce his skin, instead sending sparks flying across his chest. Rav's skin had turned silver gray, possessing a defensive strength comparable to fire dragon scales, something the scorpion-tailed beast couldn't penetrate. He grabbed the tail with one hand, and extended his palm, pressing against the stinger. A faint arc of electricity flashed in his hand, instantly transforming into a powerful bolt of lightning. The scorpion-tailed beast's tail, scorched black by the electric current, was covered in charred soot within seconds. Feeling the intense, persistent pain and numbness, it roared and immediately retracted its tail into the deep hole. Rove didn't stop it. He could subdue the beast, but he was, after all, the guard of this prison. And this prison held death row inmates. If the beast was harmed too much, the prisoners would have a chance to escape. The boy quickly walked out of the cell into the side, where he saw an old man with gray hair. The old man sat on the ground, his face grim, staring at the roaring pit, wondering if the beast was about to die so he could escape. Rove knocked on the iron bars and asked, "Hey, did you just break the firefly lamp?" The old man narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing the boy. Seeing that he wasn't carrying the firefly lamp and yet dared to stand in the corridor with such arrogance, he couldn't immediately assess the boy's strength. The old man suddenly laughed. Misunderstanding. I just wanted to make a deal with that little girl. I meant no harm. Good no harm indeed," Ralph chuckled. "I also want to make a deal with you." "What deal?" "Of course, it's to get you out." As Ralph spoke, he puffed out his cheeks, spitting out a large glob of thick saliva that landed on the iron bars. Saliva like saliva, the liquid was highly corrosive. A hissing sound filled the air, and the iron bars dissolved in just a dozen seconds. The old man stared in disbelief. Seeing the cell door disappear, he wasn't happy. Instead, his face changed, and he cursed. "You're asking for death?" He knew how to use a staffless spell and could have easily blasted open the iron door, but he hadn't chosen to, of course, because he was afraid of the scorpion-tailed beast. The old man wanted to kill the boy, but that huge tail flew back from the bottom of the pit, this time not towards Ralph, but reaching into the cell. The scorpion's tail spikes pierced the old man's body instantly, as easily as slicing through tofu, then suddenly lifted him up, suspending him in midair. The old man stared at the boy with pain and resentment, but he could barely speak, for his abdomen had been mangled. Looking at the condemned man suspended in midair, Ralph softly said, "May you be a better person in your next life." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 466 Dumbledore's Visit. A loud whistle suddenly rang out in the empty room. The black leather trunk was slowly pushed open a crack, and a magical creature, entirely emerald green, cautiously poked its head out, peering out with its tiny brown eyes. Groth saw the jailer dozing in a rocking chair, so it quietly slipped out and stood on a shelf. It quickly found Ralph's wand, excitedly trotted over, and laboriously lifted the wooden stick, dragging it towards the trunk. An invisible beast followed closely behind, emerging from the trunk. It sniffed the air and walked towards the corner. There stood an iron bucket filled with worms. The invisible beast swallowed hard, reached in with its paws, grabbed a few wriggling worms, held them high to its mouth, and with a crunch, the worms burst into its mouth, releasing their juices. The invisible beast, a look of satisfaction and ecstasy on its face, grabbed a handful of insects and began to devour them. A niffler also emerged, intending to follow the whistle to find Ralph, but suddenly stopped. A glittering object had attracted it, a galleon. The niffler darted over to pick it up, but the table leg pinned it to the ground, forcing it to lift the table with all its might. Monet, his feet on the tabletop, felt a vibration, opened his eyes abruptly, and was startled to find the niffler so close. He leaned back in fright, chair and all, crashing heavily to the ground. The commotion terrified the botricle, who hastily dragged its wand into a box and hid inside. The invisible beast picked up the bucket of insects and ran towards the passage. As it passed the table, Niffler jumped into its arms, and they vanished into thin air together. Monet, furious, stood up again, but Niffler was nowhere to be seen. He was about to chase after it when he suddenly realized that the bucket of insects had completely disappeared. That wretched little thief. After giving the prisoners their end-of-life care, Ralph returned to the burrow. Karen asked worriedly, 2 prisoners died. Will the prison cause us trouble? No, Ralph reassured her. They were death row inmates, and they attacked us. The German Ministry of Magic won't bother us with something like that. Don't worry. Just then, a faint light appeared in the distance. Ralph turned and saw the invisible beast, Uduca. Niffler sat on its shoulder, playing with a galleon. The invisible beast was carrying an iron bucket. Ralph was speechless. Why had it brought all the insects with it? But when he took the bucket, he froze. The bucket, which had been full of worms, now only had a few left. The invisible beast, burping contentedly, pointed to the Niffler on its back and growled, seemingly implying that it had eaten them. Ralph rolled his eyes at the invisible beast and said irritably, "Still lying? I'll teach you a lesson later." The invisible beast stared with wide eyes, as if it had suffered a great injustice, but its incessant burping made Karen, watching this scene, unable to suppress a smile. Ralph picked up the broken lantern from the ground, restored it to its original state, and then stuffed 2 more worms into the lampshade. He also restored the burrow to its original state, but after closing it, the symbol of the Deathly Hallows carved by Grindelwald disappeared. Karen didn't ask Ralph what he was doing in the burrow. Everyone has their own secrets, and if the other person didn't want to tell her, she wouldn't pry. Ralph handed the head to the invisible beast, making it invisible again, and the group returned along the stairs the way they came. Monet was rummaging through drawers, searching for any remaining firefly lanterns, when the boy and girl entered the room. "Here's your firefly lantern," Ralph said, handing it to Monet. "We've finished examining the prisoner and need to leave." Monet took the lantern, hesitated for a moment, and asked, "Did you see a Niffler when you came in?" "A Niffler?" Ralph narrowed his eyes, looking at Karen. "Did you see one?" The girl shook her head, looking confused. "No," Ralph said, feigning doubt. "Is there a magical creature here?" "No." "Never mind." Monet sighed, deciding to go down and check again later. "Since there's nothing else, we'll be going now." Ralph walked to the cabinet, picked up his suitcase, and said, "Oh, right, there's something I must tell you. The prisoner I was visiting and the one in the cell next to him attempted to escape. But as soon as they stepped out of the cell gate, they were dragged into a pit by a scorpion-tailed beast. If you have time, you can go and take a look. You might even find some remains." After successfully obtaining what Dumbledore had entrusted to them, Ralph and Karen returned to under the linden trees. He pushed open the door of the one shop and was surprised to see a familiar figure. "Professor Dumbledore." Ralph looked at the old man, unable to hide his joy, and said, "I thought you would be coming to Germany in a while longer." Dumbledore was chatting with Gregorowitsch. Hearing the voice, he turned his head and said, "After such a big incident with the floating dragon ship, I received a notification from the International Wizarding Federation and came immediately. Thanks to you, a disaster was averted." Dumbledore stood up and said, "Minister Carlisle told me you were staying here, so I came to find you." The old man then looked at the girl behind Ralph and smiled. "This must be Miss Gregorowitsch. Thank you for taking care of Ralph during this time." "It's not a matter of taking care of him, he's helped me a lot." Karen grinned, curiously looking at the legendary wizard who had defeated Grindelwald. She then looked at the table. There stood a deep red bird with a long, shimmering golden tail, as long as a peacock's tail, very beautiful. This must be the phoenix-named fox that Ralph had mentioned. After chatting for a while, Dumbledore explained his purpose, to take Ralph away. Karen hurried towards her room, telling them to wait there. Dumbledore asked quietly, "Ralph, did you get the things I asked you to take?" "Yes." Ralph patted his trunk and briefly recounted what had happened at Erskine Hill. "It's all right," Dumbledore said softly, unconcerned about the 2 death row inmates. "I'll tell Claire." Karen ran over and handed a box to the boy, panting, "Ralph, this is a wand I made myself, it's for you." Ralph took the wand, swung it downwards, and a red light flashed, the wand tip sparkling like fireworks, the dancing light spots projecting onto the walls. "Karen, thank you for the gift, I love it." Ralph also took a gift he had prepared earlier from his box and handed it to the girl. It was a quill pen made of phoenix feathers. Fox glared resentfully at Ralph. That kid had plucked so many of his tail feathers and given them away as gifts. What a beast. Ralph turned and left, Karen waving goodbye with reluctance as she watched him go. Once outside the wand shop, Ralph asked, "Professor, where are we going?" Dumbledore replied succinctly, "Nermungand." Chapter 467 Grindelwald and Nurmengard. A sudden burst of intense flames appeared, accompanied by the clear chirping of birds, and a crimson phoenix materialized out of thin air. Rolf released Fox's long, golden tail feathers, his feet landing on the soft earth. He looked around and found himself standing in a pine forest. Through the gaps in the leaves, he could see a black castle atop a distant mountain, its 3 crooked towers silhouetted against the leaden sky. "That's Nurmengard." Dumbledore stood with his hands behind his back, gazing at Nurmengard. His expression was complex. Long ago, it was Grindelwald and the sorcerer's stronghold, and also the prison he built to imprison his opponents. After I defeated Grindelwald, this became his prison alone. Rolf looked at the dark castle and said softly, "More like ruins. It's been almost half a century since anyone has tended to it." Dumbledore pulled his travel cloak tightly around his neck and sighed. "Time is a cruel force, it can destroy everything." "This way," the old man instructed. "To prevent others from entering Nurmengard, the International Wizarding Union has set up many spells and traps here. You must remember the route." Rolf was stunned. Was one visit not enough? Did he have to come back again? Seeing that Dumbledore had already started walking, the boy hurriedly followed. The headmaster led him through the forest, around winding, intricate paths, until they arrived at a cliff. The uphill path, hidden among the rocks, was a steep, jagged stone trail. Ralph climbed upwards. The path twisted and turned, first descending, then ascending again, becoming increasingly steep and narrow. It was filled with cracks, loose rocks, and large boulders. Ralph, capable of flight, was about to suggest flying up when Dumbledore, as if knowing what he wanted to say, said, "Flying is prohibited here." To prevent anyone from approaching on a flying broomstick, the boy could only remain silent, obediently following the headmaster as he climbed upwards. Halfway up, Ralph was already panting heavily, a gust of wind whipping his robes. Dumbledore suddenly asked, "Rolf, did you find anything on your trip to Azkaban?" "Yes," Ralph quickly replied. "I found a corpse by the lake where the Dementors are born." "A corpse?" Dumbledore looked surprised. He had initially thought it was an escaped convict from Azkaban, but as the boy described it, his expression grew serious. "Are you sure his name is Kurga, and that he went to search for the Fountain of Good Fortune?" Dumbledore repeatedly confirmed. "When Captain Carlos told me about this, he only encountered a ghost ship. He hadn't seen Kulger's body yet," Ralph replied cautiously. "He has no reason to lie." "I'll go back to Carlos to confirm this." Dumbledore narrowed his eyes, looking up at the increasingly large Nurmengard, and reminded him, "Regarding the Fountain of Good Fortune, you can ask Grindelwald. He also searched for the Fountain of Good Fortune and knows quite a bit about it. The skull I asked you to retrieve is what he brought back from there." Ralph nodded. He already knew this when he learned the skull belonged to Scylla, one of the sirens. However, asking Grindelwald made him a little apprehensive. That was the first Dark Lord, and Ralph was Newt's grandson. Would Grindelwald kill him on their first meeting? Ralph's eyes flickered, then he suddenly asked, "You entrusted the basilisk to Grindelwald as well, right?" "That's right." Dumbledore nodded. "Grindelwald's research in the dark arts is far more profound than mine, so I entrusted it to him." Ralph nodded slightly. He had been wondering who Dumbledore meant by professional. If it was Grindelwald, then he was certainly professional enough. But, the boy thought to himself, was Dumbledore sure he entrusted the basilisk to Grindelwald because he was more professional, or did he want to visit Nurmengard more often? Silence fell for a moment, and the two continued climbing the cliff. The last few hundred meters were the steepest and most dangerous, loose stones rolling beneath their feet and crashing down the stone path behind them. When they emerged from the cracks in the rocks, they were already at the foot of the castle. Rolf then noticed that Nurmengard, embedded in the steep, precipitous cliff face, looked down upon the earth like a black eye. The castle was built of ancient, unplastered rocks, each stone unique. Thick moss grew in the crevices of the rocks, along with clusters of poisonous tentacles. At the gate stood an iron gate, its teeth deeply embedded in the muddy ground, covered in red rust. When Rolf stepped forward to pull on the rusty iron ring, the gate hesitated for a moment before slowly opening with a jarring protest from the chain. The boy looked up and saw the overgrown outer courtyard before him, filled with weeds and fallen pine needles, rows upon rows of solemn pine trees standing tall. The main castle was also swallowed by green and purple moss, deep green shadows everywhere. The once fearsome Nurmengard was now completely desolate and ruined, showing no sign of human habitation. And the once powerful Dark Lord was imprisoned here. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves and weeds, as if uttering a deep sigh. Dumbledore, leading Ralph, continued forward and soon arrived at the castle entrance. Above the lintel, inscribed in German were the words, "For das Heer Wohl," for the greater good, Ralph murmured. Dumbledore stared at the words with a complex expression. The restlessness that had been suppressed deep within him suddenly surfaced. The old man stood there for a long time before letting out a long sigh. "Professor," Ralph asked with concern, "are you all right?" "I'm fine." Dumbledore's voice was hoarse and low, but recalling events from over 100 years ago feels like yesterday. "You might be curious why I entrusted something as important as the basilisk to Grindelwald, and why I brought you here to see him," Dumbledore slowly said. "Actually, Grindelwald and I have known each other for a long time. He went to Godric's Hollow to find the grave of Ignatus Peverell, one of the three brothers, and I lived there," the old man said sadly. "That summer, I was 18. He was 16. Dumbledore raised his face to the castle, as if the gentle mountain breeze could blow away his memories. Meanwhile, in the highest castle of Nurmengard, a lonely old man stood quietly at the window, gazing into the distance. "Thanks to I'm Just a Sheep, a Japanese person living a pretty good life, and Moonbay Hot Springs for their generous donations." Chapter 468 The true owner of the Horcrux. Standing at the dilapidated entrance to Nurmengard, Dumbledore spoke slowly in a weathered voice about his past with Grindelwald. Two like-minded fellows became best friends after meeting, inseparable, closer than brothers. "We planned to leave Godric's Hollow together and embark on a quest to find the Deathly Hallows, but my brother disagreed. He said we had a sick, poor sister to take care of, and he begged me to stay. We argued fiercely, neither of us willing to give in." Dumbledore sighed, his eyes filled with complex emotions. "Aberforth foolishly drew his wand, and even more foolishly, I drew mine, along with Grindelwald. The three of us were locked in a fierce battle, and no one noticed Ariana descending the stairs." Dumbledore lowered his eyelids, his voice filled with deep sorrow. "I'm not sure whose spell it was, but it doesn't matter anymore. Ariana was standing there one second, and the next she was lying on the ground, killed." Ralph gazed at the slightly hunched, aged figure and sighed softly. Although he had known the inside story for a long time, hearing the old man slowly recount this painful past still filled him with deep emotion. That summer, Dumbledore was 18 and Grindelwald was 16. Two of the most talented teenagers in the wizarding world met at the prime of their lives, destined to bear the most brilliant fruit, but their lives were ruined by an accident that no one wanted to see. If they had met sooner or later, perhaps everything would have been different. It can only be said that they met in their best years, but not at the most appropriate age for each other. The two quickly entered the castle, and Ralph looked around. The hall was vast and wide, many places nearly decayed and dilapidated, the walls and rows of wooden beams covered with lichen and purple moss. They continued to climb the stairs, and many halls, rooms, archways and grooved columns appeared, gray moss gathering into huge mounds on these buildings. Black vines were still entwined around the tower windows, climbing out of the doorways, up the archways, and up the high stone walls. The environment here was even worse than Azkaban and Erkstead. Ralph found it hard to believe that this place had once housed the monstrous Lich Kings, a force feared throughout the wizarding world. Even harder to imagine that someone could survive here for over half a century, and that person was Grindelwald. They reached the top floor of the tower and continued forward, their footsteps echoing strangely unevenly in the long corridor. There were doors along the corridor, some closed, many ajar. All the rooms were abandoned. Finally, Dumbledore stopped at the doorway in the far corner. The door had a number, but it was faded and almost illegible. Dumbledore stood in the doorway, paused for a moment, and then slowly pushed the door open. An old man in a thin gray robe stood alone by the window. He was so thin he looked like a skeleton, his cheeks sunken and his eyes sunken. "Albus, it's been a long time." The old man's aged lips parted slightly, revealing a toothless mouth. "I thought you were never coming back." Grindelwald smiled when he saw Dumbledore, his weathered face radiating an unusual brilliance from every wrinkle. Dumbledore deliberately avoided his gaze, simply bowing his head and whispering to Ralph, "This is Gellert Grindelwald." Ralph stared at Grindelwald. The first Dark Lord had been an extremely handsome man in his youth. But now he was just a decrepit old man, only his deep blue eyes still faintly showing traces of his former glory. "Hello, my name is Ralph Scamander." Grindelwald looked the boy over with interest, his eyes gleaming like polished sapphires on his wrinkled face. "Oh, you're Newt's grandson?" I've heard Albus mention you many times. Has he ever told you about me? Ralph hesitated for a moment, secretly glancing at Dumbledore out of the corner of his eye. In fact, the headmaster had never mentioned Grindelwald to him before, otherwise he wouldn't have been unaware that the basilisk had been brought here. The boy could only blink, avoiding the topic, and said, "My grandfather has mentioned you many times, saying you two have been friends for decades, Newt." "I don't have even a galleon's worth of friendship with your grandfather," Grindelwald said bluntly. "He even stole something precious from me back then." Ralph chuckled awkwardly. Grindelwald was probably referring to the blood-pact pendant that the Niffler had stolen. That was indeed Grindelwald and Dumbledore's token of love. Dumbledore interrupted their conversation, asking, "Where's the basilisk?" "I put it into hibernation," Grindelwald said. "You know, I don't have any food to feed it, so how is your investigation going?" "I followed a piece of soul within the basilisk and examined its memories. Most of them are intertwined with the basilisk." "Quite chaotic," Grindelwald said. "I had to use a lot of highly skilled legilimency to draw it out, and finally extract the memory of the Horcrux creation." "Want to see it?" Dumbledore nodded. Grindelwald raised his arm, and a skull-shaped pipe floated over from the corner. The skull-shaped pipe was a precious alchemical artifact similar to the pensieve. The pensieve's function was to place memories in a basin, allowing others to view them. The skull-shaped pipe, however, projected the images from the mind as short videos by inhaling and exhaling magical smoke. Grindelwald picked up the pipe, inhaled deeply through the tube, and then began to exhale. A huge, vividly colored painting seemed to unfold from his lips, extending to the stone ceiling. What came into view was a huge, circular pit that changed from white to gray, from gray to black, and from black to red from the outside in. At the bottom of the pit were two wizards. Ralph immediately recognized the wizard lying on the ground, muttering, "Professor Rowan Ravenclaw." Beside Ravenclaw stood a man in a coiled basilisk. The man brandished his wand at himself, shouting, "Soulbreaker, Enda Jones." As the incantation ended, he let out a painful roar, and heavy shadows gathered on the ground, slowly and silently writhing in the moonlight. Finally, a shadow split off, rose, and rushed towards the basilisk, burrowing into its body. The basilisk hissed, but ultimately a piece of its soul was sealed within it. Ralph watched this scene quietly. He understood completely now. Slytherin, after killing Ravenclaw, had used the basilisk to create a Horcrux. Chapter 469 Dumbledore, Gellert, like Ralph. 1,000 years ago, Ralph traveled to the Albanian forest to retrieve Helena's body and unexpectedly witnessed Ravenclaw's death. Helena was undeniably killed by Barrow, but whether her mother, Ravenclaw, was killed by Slytherin remained unconfirmed. At least, when Ralph arrived at the crime scene, he only saw Ravenclaw's body, not the killer. 1,000 years later, Grindelwald extracted memories from the basilisk's soul, finally confirming the killer was Salazar Slytherin. Slytherin, one of the four lords of the Order of the Wizarding World. Killing Ravenclaw sounds fantastical, but there was a compelling motive. Hufflepuff had speculated that Slytherin might have wanted the sealed left arm to complete the body of the ancient wizard. But Ralph never imagined that Slytherin had also created a Horcrux while killing Ravenclaw. The existence of the Horcrux was enough to prove that Slytherin himself was still alive. This was extremely bad news. While extracting memories, I discovered something interesting. Grindelwald extended a withered, spotted hand, gently stroking the skull-shaped pipe. After Slytherin killed Ravenclaw, he secretly returned to Hogwarts, allowing the basilisk to enter the Chamber of Secrets and begin its long slumber. In the nearly 1,000 years since then, the basilisk has been awakened 3 times, meeting 3 wizards, Corvinus Gaunt, Tom Riddle, and, Ralph held up a finger, pointing to himself, "Me, that's right," Grindelwald nodded. Corvinus Gaunt spent the most time with the basilisk. He even took it with him when he left Hogwarts. Dumbledore shifted his gaze to Grindelwald, frowning. Where did they go? Hearing Dumbledore's words, Grindelwald seemed to feel a great sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, deliberately keeping him in suspense. "Guess, tell me if you want, then I won't." For a fleeting moment, Ralph felt superfluous in the room, wishing he could leave immediately and give them some alone time. After a long, drawn-out struggle, Grindelwald finally said slowly, "They went to Ivermony School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Ivermony? Ralph was surprised to hear the name. What was Gaunt doing there with a basilisk? "I don't know," Grindelwald shook his head. "That basilisk's soul is intertwined with Slytherin's, Its memories are fragmented, and I can't extract any useful information. Dumbledore, however, seemed lost in thought. Grindelwald didn't interrupt his contemplation, instead staring intently at Ralph. Young man, I've also noticed something else. Quirrell and Riddle both followed a basilisk, or rather, under the influence of the Horcruxes, learned the dark magic left behind by Slytherin. Tom Riddle, in particular, had the basilisk kill a female student and create a Horcrux when he was only 16. Grindelwald paused, lightly stroking his sleeve with his thin, wrinkled fingers, before continuing, and you actually refused the basilisk and didn't follow it to learn Slytherin's magic. Is that not allowed? Ralph retorted. Those are all powerful spells. Look at Voldemort, he's now my most outstanding successor. Grindelwald's deep, cold blue eyes smiled slightly. If you dislike Slytherin magic, you can learn from me. I guarantee you'll be no less than Voldemort. Ralph suppressed a laugh and looked at Dumbledore. Professor, I'm reporting Grindelwald to you. He has ulterior motives. He wants to recruit me into the sorcerer party. I suggest you transfer him to Azkaban for re-education by the Dementors. Dumbledore snapped out of his reverie. He smiled and said, Ralph, I'll consider your suggestion. You can go and wander around, visit Grindelwald's prison. Go ahead. Ralph hummed in agreement, turned, and left, leaving Dumbledore and Grindelwald alone in the room. As he left, he also locked the door behind him. Grindelwald stared at Dumbledore, a meaningful smile on his face. What, are you afraid I'll corrupt him and lead him astray? I'm not worried about that, Dumbledore said calmly. I've known Ralph for a long time and understand this child better than you do. He has a long road ahead of him, but it's definitely not something you alone can influence. Besides, the old man paused, with Newt and me here, we won't let Ralph become a second you. You think so highly of him? Grindelwald asked curiously. Of course, otherwise I wouldn't have brought him to see you. Dumbledore smiled. It's not just me who thinks highly of Ralph. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw do too. That's only because he used the time turner to go back 1,000 years and met them. It doesn't prove anything, Grindelwald insisted. Ralph's ability to use the time turner to travel back 1,000 years and return unscathed already speaks volumes. Dumbledore chuckled. When you and I were his age, we were far less capable than he was. He had more goodwill toward the world than you, and he knew better than I did what he wanted. In short, unlike this boy. Grindelwald raised his sparse eyebrows, which relaxed again when his gaze met Dumbledore's. Albus, if I had had a teacher like you back then, everything would have been different. Perhaps that wrong summer wouldn't have happened, and we wouldn't be in this situation. Hearing the phrase wrong summer, memories flooded Dumbledore's mind again. Some old wounds are never truly healed, a few simple words are enough to reopen them. The old man said bitterly, Gellert, it's pointless to dwell on the past and regrets. Such fantasies belong to an old man in his twilight years, but I am an old man in my twilight years, Grindelwald said, his body hunched over, standing quietly by the window, gazing at the vast sky, the cold wind whistling around him. I may be dying soon. Lately, I keep dreaming about the past, especially the day when we lay on the grass, making a blood oath, vowing never to betray each other, never to hurt each other. The sun was so bright that day, Dumbledore fell silent. A light drizzle suddenly began to fall outside the window, slanting against Grindelwald's face like tears, but he seemed oblivious, only sighing. You thought that day was just another ordinary day, but years later you realize it was actually the best day of your life. Only, that kind of day will never come again. Dumbledore remained silent, his eyes filled with sorrow. Chapter 470 Grindelwald, Ralph, I'll teach you a lesson. When friends with hemorrhoids meet, they need some private space for tender moments. So, following Dumbledore's advice, Ralph wandered around Nurmengard. But to be honest, there wasn't much to see. The massive castle was almost entirely desolate, and the wind howled, its high-pitched, eerie whistles echoing from the cracks in the stones, like the laughter of ghosts feasting. The boy trudged through the overgrown weeds to another tower, then climbed the dilapidated stairs towards the roof. At the top of the stairs was a wooden door. The wood was almost completely rotten. When Ralph reached out to touch it, it snapped instantly, long, damp pieces of wood crumbling down, nearly hitting him. Ralph was speechless. This place was truly full of traps. He quickly stepped outside and found that the rooftop was a garden with a fountain in the center, now a stagnant pool, filled with a strong, pungent smell of decay. In the center of the fountain stood a tall elderberry tree, about 5 meters high, its branches spreading out luxuriantly, covering the entire rooftop. This elderberry was the only plant on the roof. Ralph circled the tree, wondering why an elderberry was planted there, when suddenly something drew his attention. He quickly walked to the tree and looked up at the trunk. On the trunk, there was clearly a blood-red face, though the features were blurred and indistinct, with a pair of blood-red eyes that seemed to coldly gaze down at Ralph. This tree comes from Valhalla, or in your more familiar terms, it comes from Avalon, an aged voice said. Ralph turned abruptly and saw a hunched figure standing in the doorway, staring at him. Grindelwald had appeared there at some point. Ralph looked outside but didn't see Dumbledore. The hemorrhoid consultation ended so quickly, the thought flashed through Ralph's mind. He murmured, "The island with the fountain of good fortune, that's right." Grindelwald walked over slowly. As he passed the fountain, a lone leaf drifted down, brushing against his forehead before falling into the pool. Grindelwald bent down, picked up the leaf, and put it in his mouth, chewing it gently. "I went to that island and brought back many tree seeds, which I planted in Nurmengard, but most of them died. Later, I discovered that they needed to be watered with blood to take root and sprout in this land." Watered with blood? Ralph clicked his tongue slightly, not expecting it to be the elderberry that sucks blood. He thought for a moment, then asked curiously, "Is there anything special about this tree?" "Its leaves have the effect of quickly restoring magic power," Grindelwald said. "There used to be a snake tree planted here, which had powerful healing abilities. Unfortunately, I accidentally killed it." Ralph suddenly remembered that Hermione also had a snake tree, whose leaves could also heal injuries. "Actually, this kind of tree isn't particularly special in Valhalla." Grindelwald slowly walked to the tree, his sunken eyes gazing at the face carved into it, his voice hoarse. "The reason I brought the tree seed back is because all the trees there have a face on their trunks. I wanted to know if it would grow the same face if planted here." Love's eyes widened in surprise. "Didn't you carve this yourself?" "No." Grindelwald shook his head, coughing lightly. "You can put your ear to your face and listen carefully." Love hesitated for a moment, then stepped to the tree, pressing his ear close to the face. He suddenly felt a throbbing, thud, thud, thud. Like distant rumble of thunder, it resonated in the boy's ears, each beat producing a deep, resonant sound. Love closed his eyes tightly. He seemed to see a bloodied heart beating slowly and deeply. He frowned. "This tree has a heart." "No." Grindelwald shook his head. He waved his arm, and a spell landed on the tree. A crimson flower of blood bloomed where the spell had struck, and a red line slowly trickled down the trunk. "I once cut down one of these trees. It bleeds bright red blood, but once you peel back the bark, it's just like any other ordinary tree, and there's no heart inside." "Where does that beating sound come from?" Ralph asked, puzzled. "I don't know either, not even whose face it is." Grindelwald broke off another leaf, put it in his mouth, and chewed. His voice was deep. "I asked the wizards on that island, and they didn't know either." "Are there wizards living on that island?" Ralph asked, full of suspicion. He had assumed only the 3 sirens guarding the treasure lived there. For thousands of years, countless wizards and muggles have set foot on that island. Some sought the fountain of good fortune, some sought immortality, and others stumbled upon it by chance while sailing. Grindelwald looked at Ralph and smiled slightly. "Over time, many people naturally stayed and multiplied. In short, Valhalla is a wondrous world. I suggest you go there." Ralph remained non-committal. Grindelwald didn't seem to care, simply gazing into the distance, overlooking the rolling forests and mountains. "I sent Albus to Orkstead to retrieve a skull. Is it with you?" "It's in my trunk. I'll get it for you later," Ralph said. "Do you know where he came from?" Grindelwald suddenly asked. "He said he was the son of Scylla, from that island." Ralph hesitated, then whispered, "But I doubt his words." "Why do you doubt him?" Grindelwald turned to look at the boy. "I have a friend who is a 2-tailed golden mermaid," Ralph said. "She's very beautiful, and all the mermaids in her race are beautiful. This beauty is inherited from their ancestor, Persolope. Scylla is Persolope's sister, and she's also a beautiful mermaid, but her son, judging from his skull, doesn't look like a mermaid at all, but rather like a stunted dragon." Grindelwald chuckled. "That's right," Ralph nodded. "I didn't expect you to know even these secrets," Grindelwald remarked with some admiration. "Then you must also know that Persolope left that island for the ancient Greek wizard Odysseus and has been cursed ever since." "Grayscale?" Ralph replied. "That's right, grayscale. All of Persephone's female descendants will get this disease and die a painful death," Grindelwald said calmly. "But the one who truly lured Persephone away from that island was her sister, Scylla, so, Scylla is also cursed. Her son will turn into a dragon-like monster. Ralph suddenly understood. Just as he was about to ask more, he suddenly saw a figure appear on the distant mountains. The person was walking quickly down the stone steps. The boy exclaimed, puzzled, "Why did Professor Dumbledore leave?" "Albus went back to Berlin," Grindelwald said hoarsely, looking at the figure. "He still has to preside over the International Wizarding Federation. He can't stay here long." Ralph looked bewildered. "What about me?" "Albus wants you to stay in Nuremberg for the time being," Grindelwald said, looking at the boy with an unexpectedly profound smile. "He told me to give you a good lesson for a few days." Chapter 471 Grindelwald's Deal. Dumbledore returned to Berlin, leaving Ralph stranded in this godforsaken place, much to the boy's dismay. Even staying at the German Ministry of Magic, let alone going back to Karen's house to freeload, would be better than remaining in Nuremberg with that old geezer Grindelwald, right? Of course, Ralph wouldn't show his disdain in front of Grindelwald. It wasn't that he was afraid of Grindelwald, it was simply that Ralph was a cultured, refined, and emotionally intelligent person, out of respect for Dumbledore, and to give the former Dark Lord some face. But Ralph had seriously underestimated the severity of the environment, especially at dinner time. He stared blankly at the food Grindelwald had prepared for him. It was a brown German black bread, hollowed out and filled with broth. Ralph squeezed the bread. His hands weren't weak, but he couldn't flatten it, as if he were holding a stone. It was as hard as Hagrid's rock crust, so hard it would be perfectly usable as a hammer. The broth was indescribably disgusting. Ralph would have believed it if you said it was sewage taken from the dud fountain on the roof. A couple of whitish pieces of meat floated on the yellowish, foul-smelling soup. Ralph guessed it was rat meat. "This isn't rat meat," Grindelwald said, sitting cross-legged on a rock, pinching a small amount of salt between his thumb and forefinger and sprinkling it into his soup. "That's elven meat. You can't get this kind of game in England. I caught it especially for you." Ralph poked at the pieces of meat with his fork, forcing a smile. "Well, thank you very much." Elven were magical creatures unique to Germany, and Ralph had indeed never tasted them before, but for an animal to be so abundant in a country, its meat was likely of poor quality. Besides, with Grindelwald's method, even the best meat would become pig feed. "Don't be shy. Albus told me to take good care of you before he left." Grindelwald put a spoonful of broth into his mouth and chuckled. "Don't let its appearance fool you. A little dirt won't hurt, right? The more tempting the food, the more careful you should be." As he spoke, Grindelwald placed a few elderberry leaves into Rove's bowl, emphasizing a balanced meal. Grindelwald tore off a piece of bread and dropped it into the broth. After the broth softened the dark bread, he began to chew. Seeing that the boy still didn't move, the old man said softly, "If you really don't like eating eel spirit, I'll go catch some beetles and earthworms for you. They're easy to find. Just kick over a rock and you'll find them." Luo Fu sighed slightly. He stared at the black bread and muttered, "This isn't bread soup. This isn't bread soup. This is eel noodles. This is eel noodles." He then scooped up a piece of meat with his spoon and muttered, "This isn't eel spirit. This is braised pork intestines." Luo Fu swallowed a piece of meat whole, without even chewing, but it got stuck in his throat, choking him. He quickly pounded his chest and coughed. "How is it?" "Not bad, right," Grindelwald said with a smile. "If you like it, I'll catch some more evil spirits for you tomorrow." Ralph put the bowl down on the ground with a look of disdain, then asked, "Are there many evil spirits here?" "They're everywhere in the back mountains. They're practically a plague," Grindelwald said calmly. "Many walls in Nuremberg collapsed because of the evil spirits. They stole a lot of bricks and stones to build their nests." Ralph clicked his tongue in amazement. It was truly a case of the beasts of the southern village bullying his old age. As a magizoologist, he had to help Grindelwald solve this problem. Grindelwald wiped his mouth and asked, "Why aren't you eating?" "I'm full." Ralph planned to go back to his trunk that evening and cook a little something extra. He'd rather not have the evil spirit meat. He quickly opened his trunk again, picked up a crystal skull, and handed it to Grindelwald, saying, "Here's what you wanted." Grindelwald took the skull, and suddenly two blood-red eyes appeared in the empty eye sockets of the skull. The two eyes darted around, then slowly settled, staring intently at the old man. In a hoarse, uncertain tone, the old man asked, "Are you Grindelwald?" "Ego, long time no see," the old man said calmly. "Grindelwald, you look like half a corpse," the skeleton said, barely surprised. "You've aged so much since we parted." "Yes, time takes its toll," Grindelwald slowly and shakily straightened his creaking knees, pacing back and forth. I certainly can't compare to you. I can live on forever. You, the skeleton suddenly exclaimed in terror. You don't intend to kill me, do you, Ego? I didn't kill you, you dragon scourge, back then, and naturally I won't now, the old man said, adjusting his robes. He chuckled softly. Though I'm old, our agreement remains valid. Even if I die one day, someone will help me fulfill our promise. Don't worry, really. The skeleton looked at the old man suspiciously. He knew Grindelwald's abilities, but he didn't believe he could find a successor with comparable strength. Ego, you can only trust me. Grindelwald smiled slightly, then waved his arm again, and the skull vanished into thin air. Ralph listened silently, not uttering a sound, but inwardly wondering what special deal the son of Scylla had made with Grindelwald. Grindelwald didn't speak either. He stood with his hands behind his back, gazing at the sky. Dusk was falling, the cloudless sky turning a deep, purplish blue, then disappearing into darkness. He stared at the deathly sky, the dark and desolate starless night, and after a long silence, suddenly said, Boy, you can tell Albus everything you just heard. It's all right, I'm not the kind of person who tattles behind people's backs. Ralph smiled. Besides, since Professor Dumbledore sent me to retrieve the skull, he must know about your deal with it. Ego. You're not stupid. Grindelwald smiled enigmatically, a cold wind whistling through the mountains, his robes fluttering behind him as if they had come alive. My deal with Ego was actually quite simple. I helped him kill his father. Killed his father? Ralph was shocked to hear this. That's right. Ego's father abandoned him and his mother, leaving the island, so he hates his father and wishes he could kill him with his own hands. So, who exactly is his father? Ralph asked curiously. A wizard you also know. Grindelwald's lips curled slightly, a hint of sarcasm in them. Corvinus Gaunt, thanks to Silly Young Man and 97 Waters Bitter Salty Fish for their generous donations. Chapter 472 The Tree Thief, Rav. If Ralph was most wary of anyone, besides Slytherin who killed Ravenclaw, it would probably be Corvinus Gauntlet, whom he had met several times. Born in the 18th century, Gauntlet had lived for nearly 300 years, even the aged Dumbledore was but a junior before him. As a descendant of Slytherin, Corvinus Gauntlet was one of the first wizards to encounter the basilisk, and he served as the director of the Department of Mysteries for a century, researching the relics left by ancient wizards. According to Grindelwald, he had even traveled to the island and fathered a son with the youngest of the sirens. The more Ralph knew, the more enigmatic Corvinus Gauntlet seemed, shrouded in an impenetrable mist. Of course, these were not Ralph's concerns now. He was just an ordinary little wizard, incapable of managing such matters. He was more concerned about the rampant evil spirits of Nurmengard. For the next few days, Ralph staked out the castle, waiting for them to arrive. As for why he didn't go to the back mountain Grindelwald mentioned to search for traces of the evil spirits, the reason was simple: the area around Nurmengard was rife with magic and traps, making it extremely dangerous. Ralph also remembered Dumbledore's instructions and resolutely refused to leave the castle. The boy's strategy of waiting patiently was perfectly effective against the evil spirits. As extremely dangerous magical creatures, the evil spirits weren't interested in adult wizards, but they were unusually interested in children. They would use alluring cries to lure children out and then devour them. Ralph was already 14 years old. While not exactly a child, he still exuded a youthful charm, and compared to Grindelwald, he was certainly more alluring to those evil spirits. However, after waiting for 4 days, Ralph hadn't seen a single evil spirit, while Grindelwald's daily menu consistently included this magical creature. This made Ralph increasingly suspicious that Grindelwald was deliberately exploiting his love of magical creatures to lure him out of the castle. That old scoundrel is wicked. Ralph, believing he had sensed Grindelwald's malicious intentions, decided to do the opposite, abandoning the evil spirit and setting his sights on the Elder Tree. This Elder Tree from Avalon had leaves that could rapidly restore mana. Although Ralph possessed mana-restoring magic, he hadn't yet tried liquid exchange mana replenishment with anyone. Such magic was practically useless. Eating the leaves was much simpler and more practical. So, on the 6th night, under the cover of darkness, Ralph quietly went to the tower's roof, intending to steal the Elder Tree. Ralph didn't plan to transplant the entire tree, he only intended to break off a branch to propagate in his box. Just as the boy selected a sturdy branch and prepared to act, an aged voice suddenly rang out in the darkness. "What are you doing here?" Ralph turned around, surprised to find Grindelwald standing in the corner staring at him. He hadn't been here a moment ago, he'd arrived so quickly. "It's so late, you're still up." Ralph showed no embarrassment at being caught, only a warm smile. "Staying up late isn't good for older people. The older you get, the less sleep you need," Grindelwald said calmly, walking towards the boy. "And I'm quite old now, I sleep very little each day. I often wander around late at night when I have nothing to do." "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to water this tree for you," Ralph said with a laugh. "Then you can continue your walk here. I'm going back to sleep." Ralph hurried forward, and as they passed each other, Grindelwald suddenly spoke. "It won't grow without a seed." Ralph stopped abruptly, turning to look at Grindelwald. The old man continued, "I've tried propagating it by cuttings, but all failed, otherwise there wouldn't be only this one tree now. You need a seed, just branches won't do." "Is that so?" Ralph said regretfully. "Then there's nothing I can do." "Who says there's nothing I can do?" Grindelwald's wrinkled face broke into a slight smile. "I happen to have one last seed left." The old man took a seed out of his pocket and gently waved it in front of the boy, saying, "This is for you." Ralph didn't take the seed, but simply raised an eyebrow and asked, "You're not giving it to me for free, are you?" "Free is the most expensive. Even if I gave it to you for free, you wouldn't dare take it." Grindelwald's blue eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I need you to do me a small favor." Ralph stared at Grindelwald, his eyes filled with wariness. "You don't want me to kill Corvinus Gaunt for you, do you? That way you can complete your deal with Ego." "I would like to, but with your strength, can you kill Corvinus Gaunt?" Grindelwald chuckled. "Besides, even if I were willing to let you go, Albus wouldn't agree." Ralph took a breath and said, "Then what do you want me to do?" "I want you to preserve Ego's head and bring it back to Valhalla," Grindelwald said. Ralph frowned and shook his head. "I'm afraid I can't do that either. I won't go to that island." "Why?" "I met a captain last year named Carlos, and he warned me not to go looking for the Fountain of Good Fortune," Ralph explained. "He said it's cursed, very dangerous, and all the wizards who went there died." "That's just his personal speculation, mostly out of fear of the unknown," Grindelwald smiled. "I've been there too, and I'm perfectly fine, aren't I?" Ralph didn't speak. Regardless of whether it was cursed or not, he had no intention of venturing into such an unknown place. Grindelwald stopped trying to persuade him, only saying, "Don't worry, I won't force you to go, but one day, you will go on your own. Just bring it to me then. Until then, Ego's head is with you." Ralph frowned. Grindelwald's certainty made him hesitate. After thinking for a while, he decided it wouldn't do him any harm and nodded in agreement. "It's a deal." Ralph took the seat and asked curiously, "Why don't you go yourself?" "I am Albus's prisoner." Grindelwald looked up at the sky. From here, the stars seemed brighter, almost within reach. He said calmly and sadly, "I promised him that without his permission, I would stay here for the rest of my life and never step out of Nurmengard." Ralph hesitated for a moment, then lowered his voice. "Then why did you go to that island back then?" Grindelwald didn't speak. Ralph looked at him calmly, saying nothing, only waiting quietly. The old man paused for a long time, then let out a weary sigh, tinged with loneliness. "Albus must have told you about that wrong summer." Ralph nodded. "I once wanted to help Albus resurrect Ariana. I thought that after I resurrected his sister, we would be reconciled, so I went to that island." Ralph didn't ask about the outcome, because it was obvious he had failed. He sighed softly. "Some mistakes can be corrected. But some mistakes can never be made up for or repaid." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 473 Election of the International Federation of Wizards. Grindelwald, the first Dark Lord, possessed incredibly powerful prophetic abilities. How powerful! He could see the atomic bomb explosion 20 years in advance and present the images of the nuclear blast to other wizards. This far surpassed the unreliable, half-baked abilities of someone like Terry Lawney, far exceeding those of many centaurs. Betting with such a master of prophecy was like playing a game of cards with your hand revealed. Everything you could do was crystal clear to him. Even with an incredibly strong hand, you could be easily defeated by his 17 cards. Making a deal with Grindelwald was the same. He would never make a losing proposition. Therefore, Ralph suspected that Grindelwald had already seen his journey to that island. Otherwise, Ralph couldn't understand why Grindelwald would make such a deal with him, an ordinary little wizard. Unless Grindelwald was looking for an excuse to send Ralph the seeds. But this first Dark Lord was clearly not a wealthy and generous person. Whether he went or not, Ralph was merely helping to retrieve the head, thus obtaining a seed. Grindelwald might profit handsomely, but Ralph would certainly not lose out. Out of caution, he still hoped to get some useful information from Grindelwald, even just a few words. However, after several attempts to subtly probe Grindelwald, the old man shut him down with a single sentence: "If you want a prophecy, help me fulfill my promise to go and kill Corvinus Glund." What could Ralph say upon hearing this? He could only conclude that there was a reason Grindelwald only had Dumbledore as a friend. Unable to glean any information, Ralph stopped worrying and focused all his energy on the seed. He searched the box for 2 days, finding a fertile spot, plowing the land several times before carefully burying the deep purple, jewel-like seed in the soil. Ralph also set up magic nearby to prevent it from being dug up and eaten by some vengeful spirit. Meanwhile, Ralph, who had spent 8 days in Nurmengard, finally welcomed Dumbledore back. Standing in the dilapidated hall, looking at the weary old man, Ralph asked, "Professor, is the election for the International Confederation of Wizards over?" "It's over," Dumbledore nodded wearily, replying with a faint smile. "I have been re-elected as president of the International Confederation of Wizards." This was Dumbledore's third consecutive term as president, breaking the previous record of a maximum of 2 terms. But Ralph wasn't too surprised by the result. Dumbledore's election wasn't news. It would have been big news if he hadn't been elected. This election was really quick, only 7 days. "I thought it would take at least half a month," Dumbledore murmured. "Is 7 days short?" Ralph asked, somewhat puzzled. "It is indeed quite short," Dumbledore blinked his agate-like eyes and sighed. "The longest election I've ever experienced lasted over 3 months before a new president was chosen. In that election, one of the American representatives died at the meeting because of his advanced age." Ralph stared at Dumbledore in astonishment. Dumbledore briefly explained to the boy the election process for the president of the International Wizarding Federation. On election day, the representatives stay in a secret chamber. During the election, the chamber is completely isolated from the outside world, with multiple doors locked and magically closed. And no one is allowed to enter or leave. The representatives hold secret ballot counting twice a day. After the votes are counted, the ballots are immediately burned, and the smoke is piped out of the windows so that wizards gathered nearby can see the voting results. If no candidate has enough votes, the ballots are burned with wet grass, producing black smoke. If a representative is elected, the ballots are burned with dry grass, producing white smoke. The election is then dissolved upon the new president's announcement. "What does not enough votes mean?" Ralph asked. "If the wizard with the most votes doesn't reach 2/3 of the votes, a re-vote will be held," Dumbledore said. "What if no wizard reaches 2/3? Ralph asked. "The election will continue indefinitely," Dumbledore said with a wry smile. "That's why elections can last 3 months. Anyway, by slowly dragging it out, everyone will eventually reach a consensus." Ralph was speechless. He hadn't expected the election of the president to use such a slow-burning tactic. "This repeated voting has also caused dissatisfaction among many delegates," Dumbledore said. "Over the years, there have been constant proposals to restore the old election method." Ralph knew that the old selection method mainly relied on magical creatures, unicorns. During the selection, the unicorn would first choose the wizards, and then the wizards would vote. Whoever received the most votes would become president. Like unicorns were the purest and most pristine creatures in the magical world. They could see through souls and distinguish between the kind and just and the cruel and cunning. Therefore, the wizard chosen by the unicorn was enough to influence the public's voting inclinations, without exception. This method had been in place for many years, but back then, Grindelwald killed the Kirin and manipulated it into choosing him in order to be elected president of the International Confederation of Wizards. If it weren't for Dumbledore and Newt's intervention, Grindelwald would have become president. Grindelwald's lack of wizarding ethics prompted the International Confederation of Wizards to reform, resulting in the current election method. It can only be said that Grindelwald is the root of all evil. After the election, you must be very busy, right? Ralph asked, puzzled. "Why are you here now?" "There's indeed a series of tasks to be carried out, but the most urgent matter is the Saints' attack on the floating dragon ship." Dumbledore looked solemnly at the young man and said, "Ralph, as a witness and savior, you must attend the meeting no matter what." I'm going to attend the International Confederation of Wizards too, Ralph asked, somewhat surprised. Dumbledore took out a gold watch from his pocket and examined it carefully. The watch had 12 hands but no numbers, and some small stars rotated along the edge of the dial. Dumbledore glanced at the watch for a moment, then put it back in his pocket, stood up, and said, "Let's go, the meeting is about to begin." "I'm taking you back to Berlin now," Ralph hummed in agreement, picked up his suitcase, and followed Dumbledore outside. But after only a few steps, he asked, "Professor, aren't we going to say goodbye to Grindelwald?" Dumbledore stopped. Looking at the old man's profile, there was nothing unusual, but he remained silent for a long while before saying in a low voice, "Never mind." The two left Nurmengard and walked along a path into the distance. Grindelwald stood alone by the small window, silently watching the figure that appeared and disappeared, lost in thought. After a long while, he let out a sigh. "Thanks to Just Love to Wonder in the Water for the donation." Chapter 474 Karkaroff. The German Ministry of Magic, Wizard Square. Ralph returned after several days, only to find the place largely unchanged. A large group of reporters still thronged the spacious square, seemingly never having left. No wonder, this was the globally anticipated International Wizarding Federation Congress, with reporters from around the world on site 24/7, eager not to miss a major story. The appearance of Dumbledore and Ralph immediately drew the attention of the reporters, their voices rising in a cacophony, and blinding spotlights shone in their direction. Although Ministry of Magic staff tried to maintain order, the reporters breached the cordon, thrusting microphones at them and bombarding them with questions. Mr. Dumbledore, how do you feel about being elected Grand Master of the International Wizarding Federation for the third time? A recent report from South Africa claims that London will influence, interfere with, and manipulate the Federation's elections through various channels. What is your response to this view, Mr. Dumbledore? As early as 6 months ago, 6 ministers of magic from various countries declared that you were the only candidate for Grand Master. Doesn't such early support give the impression that it was prearranged or handpicked? How many more terms will you hold on to as Grand Master before stepping down? A barrage of sharp questions rained down on Dumbledore, making Ralph tremble with fear. Were these even topics to be discussed? Fortunately, Dumbledore was used to such situations and didn't rebuke the reporters for jumping to conclusions or trying to create a sensational story. Seeing Dumbledore remain silent, the reporters shifted their focus to Ralph. Although the Federation hadn't yet made a final determination regarding the attack on the Flying Dragon ship, and it wasn't quite a news story that had swept the entire wizarding world, its secrecy wasn't particularly high for these reporters. In other words, such a major event involving a terrorist attack simply couldn't escape the reporters' intelligence network. They already knew that the young man before them was the hero who had saved the Flying Dragon ship. If Ralph Scamander was only famous in Britain before, then soon the entire wizarding world would know his name. Mr. Scamander, we heard you saved the Flying Dragon ship, is that true? How exactly did you do it? Was it really, as rumored, using a dragon? An employee of the Magical Animal Protection Society said you illegally kept a dragon. What do you have to say about that? Ralph's questions were sharp, but under the intense spotlight, he remained calm and composed. Under the protection of the Aurors, Ralph and Dumbledore walked straight past the noisy photographers and reporters and entered the German Ministry of Magic. Led by staff, they passed through the corridor and entered the conference hall. It was a spacious circular room, its walls made of black stone, the pale blue glass roof shimmering with light, casting various geometric patterns that made the hall appear even more magnificent. Dappled shadows fell on the tiled walls and marble floors. The air smelled fresh and clean. In the center of the hall was a giant circular table carved from a massive wooden plank, surrounded by representatives from various countries. A small number of wizards, upon seeing Ralph, stood up and excitedly shook his hand. These were representatives from various countries who had been rescued by Ralph aboard the Flying Dragon ship. The remaining majority of wizards, who hadn't had the chance to ride the Flying Dragon ship but had heard of Ralph's exploits, exchanged bewildered glances upon seeing him, then stirred with excitement. He was incredibly young. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Ralph sat down next to Clay, the German Minister of Magic. To his right was a wizard, thin as a knife, with a buzz cut and a white head, and a goatee with small curls at the ends. The man stared at a document with a grim expression. Ralph glanced at it and noticed it was the latest evaluation report of the magic schools released by the Federation. Hermione topped the list of 11 magic schools, while Hogwarts had finally escaped its perennial 7th place, taking a significant leap forward to 6th. Ralph guessed this might be related to the fact that no one had died at Hogwarts this school year. The man also looked up at the boy, and when their eyes met, Ralph smiled politely. "Professor Karkaroff." "Hello." Karkaroff stared at Ralph with his gray eyes hidden beneath his eyebrows, asking suspiciously, "You know me, the headmaster of Durmstrang?" "Of course I know you," Ralph smiled. "I have a friend named Corin Gregorick, and she speaks very highly of you." Karkaroff smirked. He didn't believe Gregorick would say anything good about him. When he expelled her, that girl had sent him a tirade, publicly berating him in front of all the students. "Rolf Scamander, is it?" Karkaroff scrutinized the boy with his cold gray eyes, then asked, "You attend Hogwarts, right?" "Yes." "Severus Snape, how is he?" Karkaroff inquired. "Professor Snape is doing well. You two are quite familiar." "Yes." Karkaroff seemed momentarily dazed. "We worked together for a while and had some acquaintance, colleagues," Ralph chuckled. "I heard Professor Snape and Peter Pettigrew were also colleagues. Did the three of you work together before?" Karkaroff's face stiffened slightly. He quickly smiled, but there was no real joy in his eyes. "Peter Pettigrew is a Death Eater. How could I possibly work with someone like that? Indeed, Death Eaters deserve to die. You're the headmaster of Durmstrang, how could you possibly be a Death Eater?" Ralph suddenly changed the subject, asking, "I heard Corin mention Durmstrang, saying they teach dark magic there. I'd like to transfer to your school, what do you think?" Karkaroff was horrified. Although he hadn't ridden the flying dragon ship, he had heard that Ralph Scamander had saved it with a dragon. How could a boy possess a dragon? Considering that this boy's grandfather was the renowned magizoologist Newt Scamander, it didn't seem strange that he kept some odd creatures. The thought of Ralph Scamander keeping a dragon at Durmstrang made Karkaroff's heart nearly stop. Karkaroff quickly declined, saying, "No, our school is ranked 10th, far inferior to Hogwarts, which is ranked 6th. I don't want to hinder your studies, Karkaroff." Chapter 475 An Interview with Rita Skeeter. The idea of transferring to Durmstrang was just something Ralph joked about to tease the former Death Eater, but he hadn't expected Karkaroff to reject it outright without even considering it. This completely baffled Ralph. How could someone as excellent, law-abiding, and trouble-free as him be rejected? Where was the justice? No wonder Durmstrang ranks so low in magic schools. They didn't even appreciate their top students. They were hopeless. Ralph immediately lost interest in continuing the conversation with Karkaroff and began to sullenly sit in his chair. At that moment, the meeting began. Dumbledore, as the head of the meeting, sat at the head of the table. His voice was calm and measured as he spoke in a deep voice. "Not long ago, an organization called the Saints launched a terrorist attack. They attempted to sink the floating dragon ship, causing the deaths of representatives from various countries. Fortunately, Mr. Ralph Scamander intervened, preventing any casualties." All eyes turned to Ralph, who nodded to everyone without changing his expression. Putting everything else aside, his composure and calm under pressure alone earned him the secret admiration of many officials. His young and handsome face stood out even more among the group of adult wizards, some greasy and others aged, causing many witches to catch his eye and silently wonder which lucky girl would one day be his. Dumbledore quickly gave a brief explanation of the whole matter, and a more detailed investigation report was already in the hands of each wizard, who quickly began to peruse it. "The evidence from witnesses and physical evidence in this attack on the flying dragon ship is irrefutable," Dumbledore said, looking around at the crowd. "Next, we need to discuss how to deal with the Saints organization. Of course, they must be eradicated," said the French representative, Boston, indignantly. "This kind of terrorist organization must be eradicated at any time. It's unavoidable. Imagine you're traveling to the International Wizarding Federation conference on a flying dragon ship with your pet cat, and suddenly you're attacked by the Saints. Therefore, days without terrorist organizations are truly good days." Many echoed his sentiments. They were all victims of the flying dragon ship attacks, and their shared hatred was unprecedented. However, many others looked worried. One elderly man with sparse white hair, wrinkles around his eyes, and loose skin on his chin asked anxiously, "The Saints' chest tattoos, that's Grindelwald's symbol. Could they be related to Grindelwald?" "That's right, I've seen that symbol in Durmstrang as well. I heard it was drawn by Grindelwald himself," said another burly wizard. "He was from Finland, wrapped in a polar bear skin, his thick beard like a blanket. covering his face and chest, making it impossible to distinguish where the beard ended and the chest hair began. Mentioning Grindelwald and the sorcerers sparked a flurry of discussion, their voices filled with fear. Many worried that the saints were a resurgence of the sorcerers. "This matter has nothing to do with Grindelwald," Dumbledore declared definitively. "I questioned him in Nurmengard, and he knew nothing about it." Hearing their leader's words, many breathed a sigh of relief. They truly feared Grindelwald, even after he had been imprisoned in Nurmengard for half a century. Since it was unrelated to Grindelwald, everyone demanded severe punishment. But to descend became a serious problem. The International Wizarding Federation was a powerful organization, managing all ministries of magic, and naturally possessed a wizarding force similar to the Aurors, called the International Special Forces. However, the members of the International Special Forces were all elite Aurors from various national ministries of magic. And the world was too vast, requiring far too many personnel. The International Special Forces had always been short-handed. Now, to eradicate an organization like the Saints, we'd have to conscript Aurors from the magic ministries of various countries again, and nobody wants to send anyone. After all, training a good, official Auror takes a lot of time and effort. Our own countries don't even have enough. How could we possibly give them to the International Wizarding Federation? We can't provide any more manpower. This is your European affair, Europeans managing Europeans. What does it have to do with us Africans? Said a dark-skinned wizard with dreadlocks and a robe woven from bird feathers. That's right, you European wizards wage wizarding wars, and every time you send us African wizards as cannon fodder, another bald man sneered. I'm more concerned about the magical creatures like the dragons and thunderbirds that appeared at the crime scene than the so-called saints, a Swedish witch shrieked. Mr. Scamander is clearly suspected of keeping dragons and other crimes. Rolf, feeling reprimanded, had to stand up and explain. Mrs. Greta, whenever Scamander is in dire need, magical creatures will come flying. I have a special connection with those powerful birds. I don't keep them. Greta looked unconvinced and scoffed. Thunderbirds live in Arizona, USA. In that emergency, could they cross the Pacific Ocean so quickly to fly over France? You're just as dishonest as your grandfather, knit Scamander. Greta, is this the time to discuss this? Minister Clare spoke up for Rolf. Rolf saved the flying dragon ship. He's a hero of the magical world. You can't treat him like a criminal. Watch your words. I know how to watch my words, Greta retorted. You can watch your own words. I'm not a wizard who likes to be lectured. For a moment, the entire meeting hall erupted in noise. Everyone was fighting amongst themselves, and some even threw shoes. Ralph sighed, sitting in his chair. The position of president of the International Wizarding Federation was no easy feat. But that was none of the boys' concern. After answering his question, he became like a wooden statue, openly daydreaming. If the hall hadn't been so noisy, he would have pulled out his summer homework and continued working. Before he knew it, the meeting had lasted nearly an hour. Dumbledore glanced at the clock on the table. The agenda had been covered. He said wearily, "That concludes today's meeting. Thank you all for your hard work." But no one left. Instead, the argument intensified, and some even threatened to fight. Ralph, who had been bored throughout the meeting and whose bottom was numb from sitting, finally felt a sense of relief and quickly went to the restroom. Ralph went in, gently pulled down his trousers, and a moment later, the stall behind him creaked open. The boy assumed it was another wizard using the restroom and paid no attention. But then the woman approached, gently patted his shoulder, and said in a sweet, soft voice, "Mr. Scamander, my name is Rita Skeeter. May I have a short interview with you here?" End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.